celebration of our employees and teams of the month. And because we didn't meet in December, we have two sets of months to go through now. So we are all the way back into our winners for November. And delightfully, they've been nominated by two people, being Florence Edwards and Chloe Dykins. And the employees of the month are Michael and Andy. And Michael and Andy are porters and transport up here at the BGH. And the nomination says, over recent months and over the years, they have helped with various quests, removing waste, moving large boxes, helping move office furniture. Then beautifully, they say, nothing is ever too much trouble. They're always prompt, courteous, and I know it improves my colleagues' day when they experience the support of such kind and efficient staff. They embody the trust values of working together and delivering excellent internal customer care too. I would say they are unsung heroes, but today they are sung, of course. And thank you to Michael and Andy for all that you do. Really well done. The second nomination is for the Team of the Month for November, which comes from Annie Hampson, and the team that's nominated is the Urgent Community Response for Brighton and Hove. The nomination is under the excellent and compassionate leadership of Emma Reeve, the UCR team in Brighton and Hove. They've supported some incredibly complex and challenging patients during October. In one case, the team have worked in an extraordinarily challenging environment. They went above and beyond in giving clinical treatment and personal care support to a patient for an extended time. Due to the environment he was in, no care agency would accept the patient. Throughout, the gentleman was treated with dignity and compassion. The team engaged with other agencies such as housing, the local authority, to ensure that his needs were met as best they could be over and above his health needs alone. This gentleman did give us challenging issues around his mental complexity. Despite being gravely unwell, he would discharge himself from hospital on multiple occasions. The team continued to tirelessly work with him until he unfortunately passed away in hospital. Annie says she is so proud of the care and compassion shown by all the team involved in this highly vulnerable man's care. They truly were an advocate for him, as with no agency taking any prior holistic responsibility, he had fallen through the care and safety net. I think that's fabulous testament to the Urgent Community Response team of Brighton and Hove. Really well done. Thank you. Takes us on to our winners for December. The employee of the month of December is Georgia Malins, and she's a paramedic at our Urgent Community Response team in Worthing. And Georgia has been nominated by Hannah Debenham. Hannah says, I'd like to nominate Georgia for her outstanding patient care. As part of her day-to-day work, Georgia attends to patients' houses to provide urgent care. During one of her home visits, Georgia helped a patient who has no family nearby and no other support at that time. The patient had numerous falls during the day after being transported back home by the ambulance. On Georgia's visit, the patient continued to struggle standing up or mobilizing due to feeling dizzy and was not safe to be left alone due to a high risk of falls. Georgia was not able to ascertain if the patient had sustained head injury due to trouble remembering the events of the day. Georgia called for an ambulance, but due to lack of capacity and no available help from night services, she ended up waiting until midnight, and that was when her shift had finished at 8 o'clock in the evening. Georgia absolutely demonstrated how caring, compassionate and kind she is, and this is something that is to be truly proud of, and is an example of where so many of our staff members time and again go above and beyond what is expected in ensuring patient safety and duty of care. Georgia, really well done. Thank you very much. finally, that brings us to the December Team of the Month. And Amanda Catling has nominated the Waiting Well pilot. She says that Tammy Jeffrey and Liz Barnes have been delivering a bespoke Waiting Well pilot to patients on the MSK waiting list for the past year. This pilot involved Tammy contacting patients via a phone call, offering support and information on how to wait well before their face-to-face clinical appointment. Patients have responded extremely positively, welcoming the phone call to confirm they are still on the list, grateful to be given to resources to support them, and being able to share information that is important to them before their appointment. The pilot has delivered personalised care to our waiting patients, enabling some to be expedited and others to be discharged without the need for seeing a clinician. Tammy and Liz are commended on their excellent work and a really valuable pilot with lots of learnings that can be shared widely across a variety of teams and services to support our patients to work well, wait well. And I'm really pleased to see this one because waiting well is something we've discussed at board before. What are things that we could do differently? What's more than a 10 times photocopied leaflet that we might hand out to actually make something practical and impactful? And absolutely these phone calls and this approach seems to have made that difference. So many thanks to Tammy and Liz, because this pilot really has put the patient at the heart of what we do. Thank you very much. All of those employees and teams who have joined us are more than welcome to stay for this meeting in public. You might choose to spend your time doing something else as well. But congratulations to all of you. Thank you for taking the time to join us this morning, and a fabulous commendation from the board to you. Really well done. That takes us on to the welcome and apologies and any declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest in the room that we're not aware of? And I think we've got a full attendance today with no apologies. We've got apologies from David. Thank you, Sean. Just for today is the only absence that we've got. We've got the minutes of the previous meeting, which was on the 30th of November is when we were last all together, and the minutes are there and on page in the pack. Anyway, any comments on the minutes? We're all happy that they're an accurate record of the meeting and capture what we said. Zoe, really well done. Thank you. That takes us on to the action log from last time. All of the actions are up for proposing to be closed. The first one was with Donna to consider whether COVID outbreaks should be reported to the board separately from other outbreaks.
I'm proposing that we don't, and you'll see later today on our Spotlight report that actually we have a range of outbreaks as well as COVID, so I think it's important that we look at the IPC's situation as a whole.
Well done. We have to close that as an action. Well done. Kate, you had the next one to report to the board the number of positive autism diagnoses.
Yeah, so we the data for Brighton, which is 80% of children on the pathway end up with a positive diagnosis, and use that as a proxy for the trust. The data is slightly more challenging to pull in West Sussex, but it's as expected. So because of the triage process, the children being put on the pathway who are expected to receive a positive diagnosis, that's what we expect to see.
Because they're on the pathway anyway, it's not a surprise to see that high an outcome. That would be within expectation. No. But anything else on that one for anyone? That's discharged. Kate, thank you for that. The next one is with Mark and Mike, and is for the Resources Committee to consider lessons learned from the Zachary Merton asset transfer and application to other transferred assets. I think that comes up in your. No, we did the asset transfer one.
We did discuss it at the Resources Committee on Tuesday. It's referenced in my chair's report, which I think will be out today. So I think that'll be close.
Brilliant. Happy with that, everyone? Thank you. Will you cover it in your chair's report later on in the agenda? You will. Thank you. The next action was with Zoe and Karen to review the frequency of mortality review reporting to the board.
So proposing that it remains annual, because although we've now got medical examiners within the process, the actual national guidance hasn't changed since 2017.
Brilliant. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.
All done. Propose to close that. The last one was with Caroline, completion target for mandatory health record keeping training to be reviewed through the Learning and Organisation Development of Workforce Groups.
Yes, and that has been done, and the proposal is coming to the workforce group shortly for approval.
Coming to the workforce group, and remind me whether the workforce group is the group that you chair.
Yes, and that's where we ratified any changes to education training, including targets.
Thank you, Caroline. Any other comment on that? Any other matters arising from the minutes or out of the actions there? Well done. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for your work in between these meetings to get those done. Siobhan, that takes us to, for the avid followers of this meeting who will have noted the subtle but significant changes to the agendas in some ways, is as a board we are trying to move more into the meeting in public and only have things, we're going to do a part 2 meeting this afternoon which covers up confidential issues that we may need to cover, which is things like contracts and other aspects like that. But we're trying to move more into the meeting in public as well, and also trying to talk more about strategic issues, because that's the role of the board and of the NEDs, is to seek assurance on what's happening day to day, but equally to push the board on saying, what does the future look like for us? Where does our strategy need to go? We've shuffled the agenda to try and reflect that to quite a degree, and so it looks slightly different, whether it notices or not. I thought I'd make that point. But it's the first time I think we've had it at a board in public, a chief exec's report coming here, so I'm very grateful to you for that, Siobhan. Over to you.
Thank you, Giles. So as you said, we are taking a new chief executive report in public board for the first time. So I guess the first thing to say is I'd really welcome feedback from board members about content and the type of approach that we've taken. Thanks to Hannah and Mike for putting the paper together whilst I was on leave. So I think board members reflected at the last board meeting that we don't in public talk about some of the internal updates and service issues as much as we probably could. So you'll see that the report starts with an operational update, and as we enter the end of January, I think it's kind of a poignant moment in time to just reflect on how busy our services have been over the last couple of months since we met as a board last. You can see the information about our urgent and emergency care pathways that we have in MIUs and UTCs, and extraordinarily high numbers of patients attending our UTCs in Crawley and Lewis, Crawley in particular, which is seeing more patients every day than some of the emergency departments in Sussex. So the scale of operations and busyness continues. I just wanted to add some numbers also to urgent community response, our beds and virtual wards, because what feels different for us this winter is the scale at which urgent community response and virtual wards are operating, and they are allowing patients to access both admission avoidance services as well as supported discharge services. So the feedback we're having from system partners is that it does feel different in terms of our scale and capability around both admission avoidance and supported discharge. So as of today, we've got the highest number of patients on the urgent community response caseloads that I think we've had. So I've looked at the trends back on our dashboards, but so this morning we've got 431 patients being cared for in urgent community response and 112 being cared for in our virtual wards. So that's 543 patients today being cared for in alternative pathways than any other winter, which is really, really fantastic. So I just wanted to draw that out. We've got 286 community beds open. We're at 97% occupancy, but with continued flow every day. So for example, yesterday we had 10 admissions and 16 discharges, and we've been in double digits pretty much every day over the course of January, slightly slowed down at weekends because of different staffing models across the system and across adult social care. But I think that the efforts of our teams have really been noticed in a different way this year. So I just want to say thank you to everybody who's working incredibly hard to make sure patients get a responsive and effective service from us. You'll see also that we've recently opened the Child Development Centre at Crawley. This is a project that has been in train and planned for years and years, and the staff there have often said to me over the years, I can't see that this will ever come to fruition. So I'm really delighted for the doctors, nurses, support staff, administrators, everybody who works in the Crawley CDC, and more importantly for the children and families who visit, because the previous environment was not conducive to the needs of complex children, in particularly complex children in wheelchairs. So really delighted that that's open. There'll be an official opening in early March, so we'll be able to promote that more there. At the last board, we informed board colleagues that we had to temporarily close Zachary Merton Hospital due to the patient and staff safety issues. So we did commit, and we have communicated with internal and external stakeholders that we are having a thorough assessment undertaken by a surveyor. That's underway now, and we hope to have the output of that in the next couple of weeks. So until we've had the report at the end of January, we don't know the extent of the works that are required. So just to put on record that we are mid-flow with that assessment of the fabric of the building. As the report says, delighted we've got 2 new board members today. So just to add my welcome to Veronica and Karen. Great to have you both here today. And then I was just going to move on to the national and regional issues. So on the national issues, we are in a very unusual position in the NHS this year to have not received the planning guidance. So the planning guidance, which sort of articulates the priority for the forthcoming year, and also articulates the sort of budget conditions, normally comes out on Christmas Eve. It's a kind of stated one-liner, I guess, that planning guidance comes on Christmas Eve. We were told that it was going to be delayed until February, but Mike was on a national call with finance directors yesterday, and it may be delayed further, is the messaging we're getting. So we're in an unusual position, which is based on the discussions that the Treasury, Department of Health and Social Care, and NHS England are having at a very, very high level. So just to state, it makes it difficult to undertake some of our own internal planning exercises. So, for example, how we normally convey the national picture down into the services when we go through our business planning cycle. We convey the national picture into our discussion with board colleagues around draft corporate objectives for the forthcoming year. So it's a very unusual position. Of course, we will do all of the activities that we need to do, but in the absence of the national picture, it may well be that we have to pivot in a particular direction later into 24-25 than we ordinarily would. And then the final thing, just a verbal update. In future, we will also have an integrated care system update in this chief exec report. The reason that it wasn't was mainly because of the timing of the ICB meetings in January. So the System Oversight Board, which is normally the one that I use to brief board colleagues in our Part 2 meetings, has been delayed until the end of the month. So it's next week, not last week. But what did happen this week, which was the most significant ICS meeting, was that there was a Sussex Chief Executive and Chairs Forum that Giles and I attended on Tuesday. So I thought it would be worth just giving colleagues the sort of 2 probably main items that were discussed. The first was the development of provider collaboratives. So there is now aligned commitment to establish 2 provider collaboratives in Sussex. One will be an acute provider collaborative, and that will be chaired by the Chief Executive of the University Hospital Sussex. The second one will be a community and primary care collaborative, and that will be chaired by myself. So we are in the process now of, as a system, advertising for a senior director who will have a responsibility for both those collaboratives. So we recognise that it needs to be somebody's day job to run those collaboratives. So that's the first thing. I think we welcome the fact that there are many opportunities to come together to improve outcomes for patients, to reduce unwarranted variation, to join up patient pathways. So I think the development of the collaboratives is timely and will be a really important part of the kind of system infrastructure. We're very much in the foothills of that, and so I'll be able to provide more updates through the Chief Exec's report as momentum gathers there. And then the other, I should say that underneath the collaboratives, there is a group coming together which has chief medical officers and strategy leads from each NHS organisation, exec directors, coming together as a kind of engine room to kind of start to get the content running through the collaboratives in an appropriate way. I think there will be other requirements for other system leaders to also contribute to that kind of working group. So just to note for us, obviously it's Karen, and we don't have a strategy director post here. So as an exec team, we've agreed that Caroline will be our nominee, so that we can kind of look at it from a how people change, not just what people need to do. So we're going to present a kind of more OD lens into that group. And then the final thing on the Chief Exec and Chairs Forum was we saw for the first time on Tuesday a draft terms of reference for a committee in common, which will be it will be the sort of overarching governance of the provider collaboratives in terms of making sure that there aren't decisions taken by the collaboratives that are not in line with the overall ambition of the integrated care system, and also to try to mitigate the risk. And there is a real risk, which I raised on Tuesday and others did as well, of pathway fragmentation by having two collaboratives rather than one collaborative. So it's a sort of known risk, and one of the mitigations to that is the committee in common. So the proposal at the moment and the draft terms of reference will be coming to Zoe as Trust Secretary from the Governance Director at the ICS. So he's going to share with all Trust Secretaries the draft terms of reference for us to socialise more widely. The proposal is that the members are the Chief Executive, the Chair and one Non-Exec Director from each organisation. The committee in common it will be a board committee for each statutory organisation, and every organisation will have the same committee terms of reference. The in common part is when the representatives from each board join together. So again, another pretty positive conversation. I think we'll welcome the ability to hopefully govern new ways of working in a more agile way than taking things back through constituent boards. And the sort of clunkiness and time delays that involves. So just to signal that the ICS updates will be written into this, but it's a timing issue this month. I'll pause there.
Thank you. Really comprehensive. Comments on the Chief Exec's report? Leslie.
Can I just reiterate congratulations on managing winter this year, because it's the first year that I've been aware that there hasn't been OPAL escalations, and we've all been aware of the pressures that are there. So well done on the way it's been handled, and the staff have managed the undoubted pressures that there were.
Yeah, thank you, Leslie. I won't take the credit. I'll thank Kate and Kate's team who have been diligently working and responding into system requirements and patient needs multiple times a day, every day. So thanks, Kate, and please pass on our poor thanks to your team.
I will, absolutely. Well, we're on that point, actually, well, not to criticise your excellent use of Scholar, but could I just note that admissions yesterday were 15 and discharges were 20.
Oh wow!
Okay. You were looking at the West Sussex numbers, so actually overall it was so just Zoe, just for the record.
Thank you for the
very impressive.
Even better,
Yeah.
more impressive. Yeah, thank you.
And those are very significant figures, aren't they?
Yeah.
Because there's kind of two key words we hear a lot around NHS debates. One is flow. What does flow actually look like and mean? And there's two high numbers necessarily set against what we're doing of what flow actually looks like through the system. And so it's quite nice to kind of get that on just on one day as a view of what that actually means. Yeah. But I think the other really significant figure is the some 500 people in virtual wards and UCR is people being looked after in their homes, where previously they would have been occupying hospital beds. And so that's a really phenomenal shift that we've been able to achieve, and actually does play to our treating people to where they want to be as well. There's not many people who would choose to be in hospital over their own home, their own bed. So I think that's a huge transformation to have achieved and put in place across there. Just to advertise those two around productivity and flow, I think some really key aspects to draw out from that. Are there other aspects from the Chief Exec's report? Mark?
Well, you stole my thunder, John, because I was just going to make the point that it's really that the activity that's been undertaken is making that real difference. But I also like the fact that it's being recognised. So I think there are many occasions where we do the right thing and perhaps it isn't recognised at system level. So I think that's really important, because these are patients who otherwise would have ended up in another part of the system. So I think it's a really positive message, and the scale is significant. So thank you to everybody.
Could I ask one around the Zachary Merton report that we're expecting at the end of this month? Do we know what it's going to tell us? Is it going to tell us what the needs gap is? Is it going to tell us what it's going to cost? Is it going to tell us how long it's going to take?
Yes, so it will tell us. It would be a very detailed report on the condition of the of a number of aspects of the building. So a comprehensive condition report, which would also give us an estimate of cost, and with a combination of that report and the expertise of our team, which is why there'll be a time to assess that report when we get it. We would be able to determine roughly the time that it would take as well. So that's why there will need to be a short sort of time lag between receiving that report and then sort of being able to communicate to people what the next plans are, because we do still need to overlay our own technical expertise to say, well, what does that mean for us in terms of, as you say, time to rectify it.
Thank you. Leslie?
Just one more about the planning guidance. I mean, it's going to be incredibly late, and obviously we need to set budgets. It's probably for Mike. What assumptions are we making financially that we think are going to come through the planning guidance?
Yes, so we've had, as you will recall, we've discussed before, a medium-term financial plan. So we've used that as the basis so far of our planning, because that's kind of all we've got. So we've used the efficiency requirements set out in there. We know our local priorities. We know the Sussex shared delivery plan. So we've used all of that information and any other intelligence we've got about national to set a plan. But as Siobhan says, what we normally start with every year is there'll be some big national headlines coming out of national guidance to say these are the key priority items. So we're kind of using our own local as much as we can.
So we will have a plan for the organisation.
Yeah. The missing parts are absolute certainty on the financial envelope. And that's a big missing part, and then certainty on the national priorities.
Okay.
It's worth saying in Resources Committee we covered this off and had assurance that the assumptions that Mike was putting into play at the moment were reasonable. They're directionally correct. They'll be tweaked, no doubt, when we get the planning guidance. But the other key thing is we're not waiting for the planning guidance to start activity. Their work is happening now, and then we'll just need to be finessed as we get more national insight.
Thank you. Well done, Siobhan, and thank you. You've wanted me right at the beginning. I should have welcomed Veronica as one of our new non-exec directors, the first board here, who started at the beginning of December, and Karen's the Chief Medical Officer, who started at the beginning of this month. Really, really pleased to see you both here. Thank you very much. That takes us on to the corporate objectives and water assurance framework item on the agenda. Siobhan, we starting with you on this?
Yes, thank you, Giles. So if colleagues are okay, I'll cover the corporate objectives and the strategy deliverables, and then perhaps pause before we move on to the BAF. So I think there's probably more to say around the BAF, because there has been more kind of significant change, I think, in our BAF than there has been in the corporate objectives. So just to kick off with the corporate objectives. So I think in summary, you'll see from the report that there is good progress against all of the corporate objectives, and I guess on reflection, as we go into 2024 calendar year, thinking about priorities with board colleagues for the year ahead, I kind of reflected that the some of the comments in the digital leader update probably reflects, I guess, some guiding principles for us as we move forward. So the balance, I think, of numerical data to make an objective smart with being strategic enough to be a corporate objective that gives assurance that we're achieving the goals in our strategy is a really difficult balance. And I suppose in the digital leader one, I was reflecting that whilst we've numerically exceeded the target that we set ourselves in the corporate objective, and I know that the resources committee have had many conversations about this, you'll see that there is in the last comment the need to balance the delivery of new innovations with the ability to scale up and embed the innovations that we've delivered. So that kind of issue, I think, sort of spoke to me when I was reading the board papers again this week, as something that we need to consider when we construct the corporate objectives moving forward. So you know, we have good numerical data in all of them. I guess on Great Place to Work and on Digital Leader, I think the numbers spoke to me because we've achieved them very early in the year. And so I suppose not that we stopped the work in that space, but it doesn't generate possibly the type of board conversation around achievement of our overall strategy that I think we might want to. So I'm aware this is a Q3 report, but by the time we're in the public board again in March, we'll probably be talking about draft corporate objectives for the year ahead. So I just wanted to kind of reflect on that, if that's okay. And then on the strategy deliverable status, again, a very numerically driven approach, which is helpful in some areas and perhaps maybe could be better in others. And I think in the March board, we might want to have a consideration about the development of this strategy deliverable tool, because it's the first time last year that we did that as a board. Normally, we just have the corporate objectives as the route by which we provide assurance that we are delivering our strategy. So again, just wanted to put that on the table for consideration next time we meet. But the one I did want to draw out, which is positive, is the very first one, in a Great Place to Work. It will reduce by half the numbers of staff leaving the trust annually. That was a very ambitious target, actually, and NHS England are very much focusing on leavers rather than retention rate as a headline. So I'm really pleased to say that on our year-to-date trajectory, if we continue with that through Q4, we will probably just about exceed or at least meet our March 24 annual target. So, of course, we don't know what Q4 will look like, but just doing the maths on being at 542, you know, that's roughly 180 per quarter, which is a fairly big improvement on the year that was previous. So you know, our focus around our people and being a great place to work, I think, is backed up by some of the numbers. And of course, the caveat is Q4 numbers and we don't have them, but the trajectory so far is really positive. So I'll probably pause there, Giles, before we do the board assurance framework, and just happy to receive comments and questions.
Thank you, Sean. Comments, questions on the Mark?
I think, Sean, just a couple of comments on the areas you picked out. I tend to agree with you around the numbers, but I think it was important for us to understand the scale of our ambition.
Yeah.
And I think we said at the outset, this is a 3-year play, so we shouldn't die in a ditch over a year one number. But the important thing is, you know, you can say we're going to deliver innovation. Well, is it one, or is it something else? So that was one. And then I think I'd just like to make a request on the digital piece for the detail of these innovations to come back into resources. Because one of the things that I'm not quite clear about is there's been quite a jump in terms of the embedded activity. And one of the key things we were talking about was it's not about doing it, it's about embedding the change and making a difference. And I haven't yet seen that linkage within the resources committee. So I think that's something that we should, I think we've got either in February or March a digital piece, so we should bring it back there so we can just satisfy ourselves that there's true embedding in this activity, but positive progress.
I'll draw on 2 bits from what you've just said as well, which I think is spot on. Is the numbers was noticed supposed to be red green. They're about scale and direction of progress, which you've drawn out really nicely. But probably one of the ones that kind of contributes to that is under the digital leader again, where the target is 125% return on investment, and we're at 2%. So that's probably something for you to pick up through the resources committee, because that feels like it's not at the scale or pace or direction that we were looking for there. It's not about being red or green and hitting the number. It's just kind of, that doesn't seem to be matching what it is. But I think that complements what it was that you were bringing out from that, Mike.
And I think that's true. You know, you can see we've gone slow, but also I think to what Siobhan was speaking of, you can see the problem of that metric, because our investment could be £5, and therefore a 125% return not too impactful for us. So I think we were attempting to do something new when we set these metrics, and some of them are definitely up at that big strategic outcome level, and some of them may or may not be. And so it's the definition of the metric that we need to have a bit more diligence on to make sure they're true strategic measures.
Brilliant, really nice. Leslie.
And it's the same comment really around service inequities, and we measure inputs, so how many have we reviewed, but actually what difference does that make? And it's just a plea really for when we come up to review it, and I know this is one we struggled with last time as well, that we really need to think again about actually how do we capture the difference we're making by the work that we're doing, or completely review it.
Yeah, I agree, Leslie. I think I'm aware that this was a tricky one to get the wording agreed, because we're trying to move away, as you say, from being input based, and I think Karen's contribution in the discussion for this one in particular, with Karen's background around population health and inequities, will help us, I think, to learn something that is a bit more meaningful in terms of the broad dialogue around what's the so what question, what difference are we making for patients. Yeah,
thank you.
And so with that in mind then, and you said that probably the next time we see this will be in March, we kind of need to do a revision of this, isn't it? Around saying this one's working, this one isn't. Can we revisit this one and possibly even completely redraft it, if that's what you want to be able to do to better reflect the strategy? Sorry.
Yes. So I guess there's two things. We'll need to sort of formally close down the annual cycle of activity that is associated with this year's corporate objectives. Yeah. And as a board, we'll need some discussion, probably in private first, on what we believe the right focus areas for the corporate objectives moving forward are from April onwards. So it's both. And in the answer to the forward look, some of what we've done this year may well extend into next year, but I suspect there'll be evolution and probably some new things as well. But it does go back to the planning guidance bit, because normally there's some headlines that we would want to align. You know, we can tie into our strategy, because of course corporate objectives are the deliverables towards our 3-year ambition in our strategy. But normally there's some specificity that we draw from that. But saying that, I have heard informally through the community network role that urgent community response is likely to be one of the headlines for the community sector, which does make sense and actually plays to everything you spoke about earlier around that pathway being really, that service being really successful. So I think there'll be a number of conversations evolving through February and March, Giles, I guess, and then I think we normally close this down after April into the public board, probably May time, just procedurally to do this year's work and close it down in the May public board.
Brilliant. Thank you. All done the strategic objectives. Should we move on to the back then?
Yes, thank you. So just to draw out, as the cover sheet does, a couple of the key changes to the board assurance framework. So first one is that the cyber resilience risk has been increased to a score of 12, which was agreed at the Resources Committee. And on the data quality and effective use of data, I think you'll see that there is quite a lot more information in terms of risks, mitigations, actions, assurance in the BAF this time. I was reflecting at the start of the calendar year that I think data, our ability to enable our people to access data in a more timely and simple way feels like a very big priority for 2024. And I think as we went into winter, it sort of became apparent that what we've got in terms of a slightly more sophisticated dashboard, a business intelligence dashboard, we've got a winter dashboard that's the same as we had 12 months ago. And we've got one other dashboard which looks at waiting times, but we haven't progressed. We've got our own internal scholar system, which is a very SCFT sort of mixed methodology way of accessing data, but in terms of the business intelligence tool that we have, we only have two versions on that actual dashboard tool. So I think it does need to be a priority for us. We've spoken about it as an executive team, and so I think it's good that the data quality and effective use of data, board assurance risk is better articulated with much more detail in it, because I think we can kind of start to get underneath what we need to do in 2024 to shift the dial. The target score for the estates risk has increased from 6 to 9, and the date for review has been brought earlier. Colleagues will remember that we had a board discussion last time that was both a low target score and it was out into 2026. So we brought that back in to 2025 and increased the target score, which I think is appropriate. And then finally, there's a new board assurance risk on climate change, which was more about our ability to adapt our estate and our services in response to climate change than the big ticket global issue, which of course is very real on climate change. And hopefully the articulation of that in the BAF draws that out. But I am aware there's been some discussion, I think, around Resources Committee, and happy to hear some feedback here. So those were the headlines from me, Giles, and I'll pause and we can take questions and comments.
Thank you, Mark. You've got a couple of comments, I think, in cyber and the climate change.
Yeah, we had a good discussion with Resources Committee around the risks, and from a cyber perspective, I think we were very comfortable with the increase in the risk, recognising that there are many factors here that are outside of our control. The one area that we wanted to just explore a little bit further, and we'll take it back into the committee, was the movement away from the Cyber Essentials accreditation, because that's been one of the key planks for discussion or for assurance over the last year. And I think if we are moving to something different, we need to be really clear about what gap that creates between what we are proposing and what we're doing. But we also recognise that there was some work around the current assessment, which I think will inform our understanding. So I think we support the direction of travel, but actually we want greater assurance that the actions that we are now taking provide sufficient mitigation of the risks, notwithstanding there is always a financial impact and the unknown unknowns associated with that. So we'll pick that up on an ongoing basis through Resources Committee. If I may, the other couple of others on estates, one of the things we noted was in the light of the Zachary Merton situation, and probably just a little bit more noise around estates, the potential volatility in this area. It's always been at 12 for many, many months, and I think we just had the question to execs around, actually it may not move, but do we understand if there's greater volatility and issues around the broader estates, some of which will be mitigated by work that I know is planned anyway, but that was just a question. And then in the climate change one, we had quite a good discussion there around actually what are we trying to achieve here, and it did come down to the climate adaptation piece. I think there is still a question from our perspective around, is this a BAF risk, and being really clear about what is within our gift and what we can influence. But I think, Mike, you indicated, you and Zoe, that there'll be a lot of thought gone into this, and perhaps the way it's written today, we were trying to cover a little bit too much. So I think something about boiling this down and really understanding impact on patient, impact on staff from our ability to deliver services was where we got to in resources. But that was one part of the conversation. I think the board would be really interested to get broader board views on that.
Can we come to the climate change one last? I just wanted to respond to a couple of things from Mark. So on the Cyber Essentials and Resources Committee, I can remember from an audit committee conversation, actually, we were looking at a potential internal audit approach around cyber resilience as well. So I think I welcome the fact that you're having the conversations at Resources Committee around, if not Cyber Essentials, what is the route? And I know that Louise Williams, who is our Deputy CIO, has been involved in those discussions with you as well. So I think it's positive that we are thinking more laterally than one way of assessing our resilience around cyber risk. So that's positive. On estates, I think it's a really good point. So this is work in train, but I've asked our executive EMG, Executive Management Group now, for us to have a much clearer articulation of estates risks on the risk register, because we've had the board discussion that the Zachary Merton position changed very, very quickly, and we weren't cited on the level of risk, or the level of risk wasn't articulated at a level that would reach exec group. So I think the BAF risk does need to be informed by the pattern of real-time operational and estates-based risks that we are discussing at Exec Management Group now. The same can be said for digital, actually. So my reflection and Mike's reflection over the last couple of months is, whilst we see all risks that are scored 12 and above at Exec Group every month, they are very, very operational, and there are very few corporate risks that we discuss. So I know the team and Zoe and Mike and others have been working with our risk manager to work out how we get both digital and estates risks better articulated. The challenge of estates risk is historically they've been tagged as operational because they've had operational impact, but actually the root cause risk is an infrastructure one. So we need to be better at identifying where are our biggest, as you say, the fluctuations in risk around our estate, are live every month, and we're not quite cited on that. So once we're cited on that, I think that will help for us to make a more measured judgment around whether the BAF score does need to change or not. So I think the two things are linked. I just wanted to make that point, Mark. I know you and I have talked about it, but I'll hand to you because I know you want to address.
Right, one more paper just before you come in there, because it's based on that. And I think there is the big pieces around what does almost the business continuity look like with the estates as a piece. But I think we do have a challenging estate, in as much as it's all over the place. It's of varying degrees of age and quality, and as it ages. But as I go around the organisation, there are several times people saying, this bit is leaking, this bit is broken, this bit is moulding, this bit we can't use, this whatever this. And all of those are tactical. But at some point, they'll be kind of, actually, this is a general theme across the trust that we need to be able to do. And it kind of plays into, this is a great place to work. Yeah. This is somewhere I want to come to. This is somewhere I feel cared for and looked after, because the environment that I'm in is a quality environment. So I think you're right, is at what point all those tactical things add up to saying, actually, there's something really significant about the general maintenance that we're looking at as well. Sorry, Mike.
No, actually, it's feeds in really well, because, and we discussed at Resources Committee, some of the pieces of work to be more responsive on this BAF risk, but underneath be more responsive in terms of the knowledge of our estate and where we're going to go to next is both that risk piece that Siobhan spoke about, but also putting together a broader view of the condition of our estate. So not just a technical estates view, but a staff usability view, a patient operational suitability view, and access and location view. So doing that in a composite way for all of our estate, so that we look at all these different aspects, whether it is, as you say, impacting a great place to work, whether it's impacting on patient access, and actually health inequities, because we've got clinics based in the wrong place, for instance. So, but put condition right up there with that as well, I think helps us manage this risk in a much more informed way. So we talked a bit about that at Resources. It's a plan to do that we've talked about, and a first look at Resources, and actually there's been discussion at People Committee for people and staff aspects of that. So a draft look at that. There won't be the full review, but a kind of first cut of it in March, but with more diligence to kind of keep on improving it and making it more and more responsive. So that, beside the risk register, I think really will help us manage the risk.
Caroline.
Yeah, Mike has just mentioned it. I think the state of our estates is an ongoing conversation at Workforce Group and at People Committee. So whilst it's important that it goes through Resources Committee, the impact on our people is significant. We can do everything we want to do, but as you say, if there's no heating or the roof is leaking, then that's not the right environment for our people. So I think the dual conversation is important, that we keep that lens as well about the impact on our people, our retention, our attraction, is important. So I think these dual conversations will need to carry on.
Thank you.
And then Mike, the climate change.
Yeah. So the climate change one, we had a really good discussion. I think so. This risk has been sort of synthesised out of 83 or so kind of different minor, smaller operational risks around sort of our green plan. Some of them are just project risks. So a lot of thoughts has gone into kind of articulating risks to delivery of the green plan, but mixed up, as Mark I think stated there, with actually what's the consequence of not delivering the green plan, because some of them are just project risks, just that I won't be able to do this bit of work, rather than thinking about, well, does that matter? Is that really impactful or not? So I think this risk we need to pivot much more towards, is it impactful? So what are the issues around climate adaptation in the way we run and deliver our services? And that's broader than buildings. That's kind of the way we get about the county, and that's sort of weather events, whether they be flooding, kind of heat, cold, droughts, it's the whole lot. And we're seeing more and more of those extreme weather events. So it's our ability to adapt and the risk of that impacting on our patient services. So we've had a good start, but we need to take away the risk to delivery of the green plan and make them more project risk and operational risk, and for a back risk really impact on that more strategic impact.
I think it's interesting that this rises on the same time, not to do a spoiler at the end of this agenda, of course, but it comes at the same time as an emergency preparedness, resilience, response. Because a lot of what seems to be coming out of that, and you come back to the board seminar that we did on risk, what's the core point of this, is a lot of what you're talking about there feels like business continuity, as opposed to kind of climate change or anything else that's in place. And of course, we've got a really solid business continuity report effectively coming through here. So again, it does beg the question: is this the thing that should be right up at that level? But I'd welcome further discussion at resources committee around how we flesh that one out. It'd be really interesting. The only other one I'd probably draw out is if anybody looks through this, is that the workforce risk has been at 16. And Mandy, I know that you do reflect on this in your chair's report coming out of the people committee.
Yes, and I guess it's hard, isn't it? Because it is one of the biggest risks to the trust going forward, and those are long-term risks. And we've had a whole debate about whether or not we should lower the risk to reflect the fact that in the short to medium term, an awful lot of progress has been made on them, as we'll see in the numbers that later on. But so we are making lots of progress in lots of areas, but we felt that it was the right thing to leave it at that high risk level, partly because we're still grappling with the long-term workforce plan. And I think when we really get a clear sort of strategy together as to what that looks like, it might make us feel a little bit more like we've kind of got our arms around it. Although, I think going forward, it is going to be one of the most significant risks that we face. And I think playing back to the board seminar we had before Christmas, I think it feels right to leave it at 16 until we've got a little bit more kind of certainty around what we're doing with the long-term workforce plan.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I think the other key element around managing our resources effectively is the current procurement that we have around the rostering system, which will go from half of our workforce being monitored by a workforce system to the whole organisation. So I think there are
supported rather than monitored.
the deployment being monitored and controlled. So it's not the people that are controlled; it's their deployment. But I think Mandy's right. I think what we shouldn't lose sight of, and I think that's the dilemma that the people committee debates all the time, which is actually when we look at our workforce data, we are in a very good position, certainly in comparison to lots of other organisations and in comparison to where we've been. So if when we compare ourselves to ourselves, we're doing well, and we compare ourselves to others, we're doing well. Having said that, and that doesn't take away the fact that there are significant challenges in some professional groups and in some services. But overall, the picture is positive. There are two things, as Mandy said, that are really important to us. One is the strategic workforce plan, which we talked at length at both EMG, so Executive Management Group and People Committee, around the importance of us understanding what our workforce needs are going to be going forward, so the more longer term plan, and the rostering system, which allows us to more in a more agile way deploy our people, but also understand the variations in absences, for example, on a day-to-day basis. So I think these are two key things. Once that is more underway, I think People Committee will be more akin to a reduction to 12.
That's good news. I'd be really interested what thinking we're doing about how we're going to be using health roster differently when it goes across the whole organisation. Because I went and sat with one of your staff, who's the guru on this. Is it David? David, for a fascinating morning if you're a bit of a geek like me. But Mandy, I'd recommend it. But I think there's a huge opportunity there where he's kind of saying, here we've got something the size of a planet and we're using it in AT. That's nice and natural. But so there's just something about, all right, now we've got this investment. How are we going to really reset? Because you get a chance on day one, but after that, everybody just uses it the way they've always used it. So I think there's a real opportunity there. Thank you. All done on the corporate objectives and the BAF. Sean, thank you for that. Really good. This takes us on to the improvement programme report, and coming to you, Donna. I'm really pleased to see this report here, although I started reading it with a bit of a dissenting heart, thinking we're getting a description of how we're doing things again, until I turned the page and got positively excited to actually see the updates on what we're actually doing as well. So it's really nice to be able to see that coming in at board level here. But having said that, over to you.
Thank you. I'm so glad you got excited about this report. What a great introduction, a great way to start when you're thinking about improvement. So as Charles said, this is the first time that we've shared this report with you. We have had some informal board discussions around improvements, so you are all cited on some of the kind of group collective thinking that we've had about where we are and where we want to be in terms of improvement. What we've tried to do here in this report is provide some narrative which tells you a little bit about the story and gives some kind of internal context and describes the improvement leaders group and some of their collective thinking and collaboration in that, but also describes how we've approached some of the external drivers, particularly NHS impact self-assessment document, and then it talks about what the next steps and priorities are. So that's just that kind of almost the framework around where we're at. I think it's important to, when we look at the NHS impact self-assessment document, I think it's really important to note from that there is improvement happening all the way through the organisation. So what you have here is the strategic improvement programmes. When we're looking and self-assessing ourselves against the NHS standards around improvement, then we're looking at improvement in its broadest sense, and we're looking at all of the work that's happening at a very operational service level, but using an improvement methodology. And it might be happening in our digital team, it might be managed through our PMO team, it might be somebody who attended the crash course and they're brand new in the organisation and they've seen something and they think, let's make a difference, I can improve this. So we're trying to kind of capture all of that. But what you have here is the strategic improvement programme. But I just wanted you to be aware that that's happening, and we've reflected that in our sort of scoring and our rating in our self-assessment. We sort of came out as a pretty much solid middle position really on all of the areas of the self-assessment. Which is actually quite a good place to be. It means that we're thinking about improvement from all angles and we're not just focusing on one aspect of it. And I think it's important to recognise that improvement itself is very incremental. So this will grow over time. So to be in that kind of solid middle position, actually I think is probably a good place to be. It means that, like I say, we've considered all of the elements of improvement and we have things in place for all of those. Second half of the report, I think maybe the more exciting part for Giles is the bit where we talk about the strategic improvement programme. We've used a PMO approach to report on that. So we've described each of the 4 programmes. We may not do that every time we report this to you, but because it's relatively new, we wanted you to fully understand the improvement programme, the problem definition. We've also used some sort of diagrammatically represented some issues around project maturity, and we've also included some metrics there. I think it's really important to note that the programmes are all at very different levels of maturity. And that's fine. We will grow as we do this. really would appreciate, welcome a discussion, feedback, constructive criticism. One of the things that we would like to sort of feed into the conversation as well is whether we can give some consideration to the role of the board committees in relation to improvement and improvement reporting and that assurance role as well. Because I'm conscious the board sort of has a championing and a leadership role in improvement, but it does also have an assurance role as well. So it's how we kind of balance that. I'll pause there. I'm happy to take any questions on the sort of context. If there are specific questions around the improvement programmes, I'll ask the relevant executives to follow up on those, if that's okay.
Very good. Thank you, Donna. Phil.
Thank you, Donna. I really welcome this, and it's useful to bring it all sort of to life, to see all the programmes together. My question is on the metrics, because in one or two you've actually got where you're aiming to go. Some of the others just say what the metric is. So the question is how are you going to know you got there on these programmes? And you probably have got targets and metrics, but it'd be really helpful if they were in the paper.
Yeah, we do have metrics for some of the programs, but you'll see that some of the programs, so community nursing, for instance, there is only one metric there. So, but that's a program where we haven't yet identified our change priorities. So to then try and identify what our metrics will be, it is kind of doing it in one way round. So I think you're right. We need to kind of grow those metrics, and that's part of the maturity of the programs. So when you look at there is a proper term for this, when you look at that kind of spider web diagram, and somebody will tell me what it's meant to be called. You can see that that we're not always very strong at recognising or anticipating what the benefits of the programme, or articulating, I think, really the benefits of the programme. We know. But when you think about improvement methodology, it's really important that you don't go straight to what you want to achieve. You start out with what's the problem, and that's the bit that kind of takes time. And if you get that right and you define that properly, then you can actually identify the right actions. And the metrics kind of come with that bit about the right actions and the measuring and understanding the baselines to be able to monitor that. So I think you're right in recognising that we're not in a consistent place with this, and we're aware of that, and that's part of what we're working on.
So that will come at some point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Besh, unless there's on that point, mate.
Yeah, it was just that, and I think Joe's point was about the target. So actually the community nursing one, I think we very expressly, even though there's only the one outcome metric, we said we were going to get to, and we do have some of that thinking. So I think it's a good thought as well that it's more developed in some areas than others, but we should actually show our aspiration on each of them. And the community nursing one, although more in its infancy, has said we're going to get 70 in terms of the length of time in the caseload. So we've actually defined success there. You're right. So we'll go back and have a think about making sure we can put out the successful definition on the other.
And I think some of them are in other papers.
Yes, exactly. So we have it on a lot of these. We just need to bring it all into this paper. Yeah.
I think one of the themes for this for me kind of plays back to the conversation we had around the strategic objectives piece, is where's our baselines? Because as you said, there's a lot of aspiration. I want to reduce this, I want to increase this, I want to whatever this. Immediately says to me, right, so what's the baseline? Yeah, what are we working from? And then I guess it's also that scale and direction to catch.
Yeah, and just to reinforce what you said, I really like the whole layout. It's very clear, and I mean, I like a good chart, but the radar chart, the radar chart really sort of demonstrates maturity. So I think it's just a good way of doing it, and I'm looking forward to see how it develops.
Thank you, Depeche. Mark.
I'm in danger of agreeing with the excitement levels. I thought that the pages that you used around the problem statement and the aim and the improvements were really powerful, because it shows a clear intent. And I think just picking up the comment around metrics, I would challenge you to go back to the things you say in there in terms of the aim and the improvements, and say, do the metrics help articulate that outcome? Because they do in part. I mean, in fact, the community nursing one's a good one, because there's a very clear, let's get down to 70, but within your words, you're also talking about changing the positive impact on patients or staff and so forth. Is there a way in which you can evidence that? Is probably the question. And it's harder, but the question is there an opportunity? And I think that's the thing I would say across all of these. How do you show that broad intent in the way in which you measure. And then the other thing,
Sorry, just on that, I guess there's something is about. You could get to 70 tomorrow if you wanted to, but it would be a disastrous service. And so and that's the assurance that we need is you can get to 70 and maintain the qualities that we want. Sorry.
Yeah. And the other piece, I had a slightly different perspective on the charts to Dipesh. So I was looking to see in the sort of bar bit, where's the green? Because that's the improve and that's the do something. So wherever there's lots of analyse but no do, I was sort of thinking, okay, so when are we doing the doing? Because the whole point of improvement is to do something differently. So and that's from a project perspective. But I would encourage you to make sure that we get to the green on these before the end of 2025.
Can I add to say, you've got on the left-hand side a sense of kind of, but for the overall programme, not the individual projects, a sense of doing. So where are we on our milestones? Are we delivering? Are we delivering on time? Are things at risk? We do have one of those, obviously, for every timeline, and we do have within our project management system a timeline with all the milestones against them as well. So, but actually, the complexity of trying to show a summarised version of the way up to board is kind of where we are at the moment. But absolutely, the information's underneath. What that line is just trying to show you is what phase of the project are we in, and sort of a sense of when's it planning to start and then complete. But I understand what you're saying. It's quite a challenge to kind of go between the summarised and the detail, but let me maybe we bring that out through the exceptions that we talk about potentially.
And again, I think for me, it's just a bit that says, actually, we think this is a really complicated piece of work that's going to take 2 years, or actually this is a 3 month, 6 month piece that actually we think we can make some change quickly, because you've articulated the intent. I'm just trying to get a sense of A, what does it look like when you've done it, and B, when might we see that change? That's what I'm trying to articulate.
Brandy.
I just want to, I'm not going to harp on about metrics even more, but there's something about, it kind of saddened me when I saw the Community Nursing Improvement Programme, when it says that they're saying that a number of changes in recent years have taken place, but they failed to deliver meaningful improvement. But I think one of the things, if we're going to go through the exercise of being really clear about the metrics, there's something about communicating and celebrating each kind of improvement that we make. And I think sometimes, I guess my sense is that we've got a lot of input measures. We're not great always at measuring the output measures, but also the communicating that, so people can actually see that rather than just talking about programmes in words, that these really have had an impact and they have made changes and they have made things happen. And I think there's something about trying to sort of change a bit the mindset that says actually where we do, because it will encourage more continuous improvement and more change to come, is that if people can kind of see, and even on ones where, and I take the nursing improvement, that's a big step change, isn't it? But even if there are quick wins, to kind of get some messages out there to say, you know, some of this is already having an impact, and you know, and even if you're taking tiny things, but actually giving people the kind of confidence that it can get there, I think can be really powerful.
I think just building on that in terms of thinking about metrics and the maturity of some of these programs at the moment, I think there's opportunity as these programs do mature to start to look at more personalised care metrics there. So we're changing to a more meaningful outcome focused approach in terms of how we're measuring impact. So things like supported self-management with community nursing will make a big difference if we're actually empowering people to build the knowledge, skills and confidence to self-manage. That will reduce that caseload. So I think that's an exciting area to start to explore going forward. Thank you. This paper's great, so thank you, Donna, and I absolutely appreciate we need to look at the 4 main areas that are focused for continuous improvement. I don't want to lose sight, though, of the multitude of work that's going on behind it. And it's how we get snapshots of that maybe coming back to the board, because otherwise it looks as if our focus is just on these 4 areas. And exactly as Mandy said, you know, the HCA down in Bognor may not recognise any of this, but it's still doing a lot of continual improving and the work that they're doing. So where that comes back to, I don't know, but I just feel we need a wider overview occasionally, not to dive into the detail, about the whole range of improvement schemes that are going on.
report yesterday at EMG from Gillian McTaggart, who leads the QI team, and lots and lots of very service level kind of operational detail around outcomes, and a real shift from projects that focused on kind of process to actually projects where we could demonstrate outcomes. So we probably need to have a think about.
And we see that in QIC, don't we?
See
But,
that QIC,
but actually,
think about how we can share that with.
I think occasionally we need to see it here as
Yeah.
well.
Caroline.
Yeah, just 2 points really, just following on from Leslie's point. I think what we talked about at EMG yesterday was the need to have a combined report of all of the improvements and transformations and that are going on in the organisation at every level. So that we don't call them QI or programs of improvement or transformation, they're all together. So that's the first point. The second point is, I think, for the workforce systems one, because it's been part of the cycle of business of the People Committee, I think the People Committee has been able to see the journey of the programme. Actually, there were many more projects underneath it until recently, when we made a decision that actually those had delivered and we now needed to move into a different phase. So I think that it's important that we have those discussions at different committees as well. So there's more detailed discussions about the progress that has been made, the achievements, going back to the celebrating the achievements and understanding the measures, so that when we come here, that depth has happened as well.
Thank you. Mike.
I think it's been said. I was going to mention the EMG report yesterday, so Dom said it.
Well, I think it's fair to say this is warmly welcomed here, both in the approach and in the content of what's there. Correct me if I've got this, I've got this wrong, but I think you and I have tried to discuss how do we balance what goes to committee, what goes to board, and trying to avoid duplication between the two. I think that there is the balance that these four priority project programmes come in at board level. And if there are specific issues to pick up within them, such as a metric or anything else like that, we can ask the committees to pick up on those, and it's mentioned at committee level. I'd like us to try and do that in the first instance. I know it may put more risk on you, or bringing something straight into board without necessarily running it, practicing the committee first. But I think the risk that we had before was sometimes when something went to one or more committees, by the time we got here, board members had seen it 2 or 3 times. So actually we didn't naturally get a very natural board debate around it. And to try and work it that way. So absolutely the big four would come in here in the first instance and play it out to committees if there are issues that we want to be able to pick up in more detail on the back of that.
I agree wholeheartedly. I've wanted that to happen for some time, so that we get this very discussion at a strategic level about the breadth of improvement. So I agree. I guess the question is frequency. I don't know if we've thought about that, Zoe, in terms of the cycle of business.
Pick that up. See what makes sense.
Yeah, so that I think, you know, they are strategic programs of improvement, so they will need some time to be able to show progress, and I think we just need to get that right. And also, if we do take a fuller improvement report, which I think Leslie is right, again, what does that look like on the cycle of business to do the broader piece directly at board? But I think it's absolutely appropriate that some of the work that we do that goes from exec management group comes it from directly from exec management group to boards. That doesn't always have to go through a board subcommittee. So I think that's appropriate.
Good. Thank you. Thank you for that, Donna. Really well done. Thank you to everybody who's running projects underneath there as well. That, I believe, takes us on to the IPR. Mike, are you talking us into this one?
Yes, if I start us off, but as always, then I'll pass on to the responsible execs for their section. We have the IPR in front of us. There's a couple of notable bullet points on performance on a cover sheet, but I don't want to steal anyone's thunder, so I won't really dive into them. We do also have a slide which is talking about a year in numbers, and those are very popular last time we presented, so I wanted to do it again. We've had this is the calendar year this time. We'll think of different ways of showing a year in number, but this is the calendar year from one to the next, and just showing some of the changes. And I wanted to bring out a couple of things. Some of it we discussed last time, the continued sort of scale of the community nursing team activity. You know, the number there dwarfs all the other numbers, so let's always be mindful of that scale of activity. It's stayed pretty steady. That doesn't mean it feels steady in those teams, and also the nature that you know, one number belies a lot of differences. So the nature of the work they're doing, the intensity of the work we're always being reported on is, over time and as systems struggle, they're picking up more and more complex work and undertaking that work brilliantly. Then I wanted to pick up, because rather than just talk about beds, I think we've got to look at the urgent emergency care pathway. So there's a statement about admissions over the last 12 months being down in our ICUs. And that's a combination fact. We do actually have less beds in this current calendar year than we had in the previous calendar year. So that would naturally move a little bit to admissions being down. And as we've continuously talked here, the average length of stay was higher in this calendar year because of the delays we've been talking about in terms of being able to get people back to their place of residence. So we do have two factors there that would mean the inpatient admissions are down. However, you balance that against the urgent community response activity being up 70%. And actually there's then the totality of the activity we're undertaking. So I would always urge us not to just concentrate on the beds when we're talking about urgent emergency care, but step back a bit and think of the whole. Those are the things I wanted to bring out. There's other interesting items there. Unless there's any questions on that, I was going to pass over to Donna for quality.
I find this incredibly helpful. It's incredibly helpful to use to talk about the organisation, to talk about the agenda of what impact community has when all the conversation is about acute and ambulances at a regional and national level. So this is the stuff that kind of really goes power to the elbow of what's going on. One of the other kind of big buzzwords in the NHS, or all we're in discussions on NHS, is around productivity. And of course, in order to turn these into productivity, you actually need to see what's the headcount going on underneath in some way. So that would be the only kind of the danger of putting anything in front of the walls with that a little bit more. But then you can almost talk about productivity with these. Of course, the other element that you brought out is complexity, but for productivity, you need to know people. Leslie?
No, it's all right. I found the answer to my question. Thank you.
Thank you. Donna, should we crack on with the quality report? No, sorry.
It was only an observation, and that was, this demonstrates that we've had more contacts overall people year on year, and absorbed within mostly the existing resources. I know there's some money's coming for the urgent community response team, but it's actually a well done to our staff. I think that they've managed to increase workload with not a measurable increase in resources. So I think we all just need to note that.
Thank you very much, Jill. Well done. Donna?
Thank you. So shall I start with the Quality Spotlight report? Focusing again on outbreaks. Just to update you that since December we've had 6 COVID outbreaks, but we have also had 2 mixed respiratory outbreaks, which become really challenging for our wards to manage. What we haven't had, however, is we haven't had any outbreaks which included norovirus. And yet we're working in a system where our partners sort of on the edge of our system have had outbreaks of norovirus. So we're doing well at the moment to have kept that at bay in our ICUs. We undertook a thematic review for Q3, just to have a look at some of the root cause of the outbreaks. Difficult to identify most of them, but you can see that some were 17% were caused by an imported case from one of our acute partners, and 17% by a visitor who subsequently told us that they were infected with COVID. So it's just helpful to kind of to know that as well. Some of the contributing factors to our outbreaks is obviously the high prevalence in the community. The national requirement to test has significantly reduced. So we don't test people, either staff or patients, if they're asymptomatic. And that can make it, that can mean that we make decisions around where we place patients in our ICUs at the point of transfer. They may turn out to not be the right decision when somebody subsequently develops symptoms. And some of our estate isn't, has challenges really. We don't have a lot of single rooms to be able to cohort people all the time. We don't always have ensuite facilities when we do have side rooms. And some of our some of our ICUs have bays, which then have linked corridors in between the bays. So that doesn't help us to cohort people particularly effectively. But it's all helpful information to help us to understand how to manage and cohort as effectively as we can. Just staying on the IPC theme, I just wanted to, it's not within this report, but I just wanted to update you on something that you may have heard about in the national media recently around measles. So there was some information that came out over the weekend that said that there was a national incident in relation to measles. That was slightly incorrect or inappropriate language. There is no national incident. UXA are seriously concerned about measles, but there is no national incident. They have issued some guidance for all organisations, and we're stepping up an incident management meeting just to make sure that we coordinate our response to that guidance, and we work collaboratively around that. Most of the guidance includes issues like how we ensure that our staff are vaccinated. We put in place any additional measures for staff who may be at high risk of measles or the impact of measles. And then there's some actions around where and how we may want to triage and screen patients. And the other actions around things like fit testing for FFP3 and use of PPE, we're confident that we're very well versed in. So I don't think so it's not creating any particular gaps or issues of concern for us. And then just from a data perspective, I've just confirmed this morning that taking all of that into consideration, there are actually, as of up to the 14th of this month, there are no cases in Sussex and there are no cases in the South East. The vast majority of cases are in the Midlands and London, and then a little bit in the east of England as well, but generally the Midlands and London.
Brilliant, thank you. Anything for Donna around Spotlight Report or the RPR? Thank you, Donna. Well done. Kate, that takes us on to the operational piece.
Does indeed. So if we start with advertising stays, some of this has been covered in our earlier discussions, so I won't kind of dwell on it too much, but just to note that our advertising stays since September has been better than the target we set as part of the Sussex-wide discharge improvement days, which was to hit discharge improvement work, which was to hit 32.4 days by December. Probably to note is that the number of patients who are in our beds who don't meet our criteria to reside but can't be discharged is increasing at a fairly rapid rate. So you'll see in November that was at 36.2%. Today we are up at about 43% for January to date. So that is causing an impact on our ability to move patients through the system. But I think that kind of makes it even more commendable that we're seeing the levels of flow.
What percentage is it?
43%.
Have we had it higher than that?
No, it's one of the highest that we've seen in a very long time. Sorry.
Well, just that it's timely. This is causing quite significant. The knock-on impact is causing quite significant patient safety risk in the West Sussex area in terms of the impact on, as Kate says, patients moving particularly from the acute hospitals into our beds. So whilst we have a very small number of beds available and we're working hard to admit and discharge, as we said earlier, it is creating quite significant impact. So I've been involved this week and will be at lunchtime involved in escalated calls with the Director of Adult Social Care at West Sussex County Council, the ICB Chief Exec and the Chief Exec of University Hospital Sussex. So I think just to bring to life the reality of what that does is it means that patients are predominantly sat in the acute hospitals, which means when additional delayed and then additional patients are coming in through emergency departments or in urgent and emergency care pathways, there are no beds available. So this is a very significant issue. We've escalated with West Sussex County Council. They're very stretched on their resources and their capacity and capability to help. But we should know that the direct impact of having such high numbers, 43%, I can't ever remember being up into the 40%, is directly impacting the wider system, and patient safety is a real concern.
The high number isn't always is different to the highest percentage because, of course, with was closing Zachary Merton, we've lost 26 beds, or is that not counted? That hasn't shifted our percentage, we're still counting those?
No, so it's a percentage of our available beds.
So the number of patients, the same number of patients is a higher percentage?
Yes.
With fewer beds?
Yes. So it's a percentage of our available beds.
Yes.
So of our available beds today, 43% of those are occupied by patients.
You know, the
Who should
number
no
of
longer be
patients is the highest we've ever had,
Um,
because the percentage would go up because we've
I
lost
want to
26
say
beds.
yes. But
I think it is.
okay, I think
We've got-
it is.
We've got
Yeah, I
286
think it is.
beds available today, so just under half of 286
It is.
takes us to very much, that's what 100 and
Don't worry. The point's made.
40, I was going to say probably about 130. Yeah.
Are we seeing the same level in rapid response and virtual wards as well?
Yes,
So it's
we are.
across the board?
Yeah, it's across the board. So let me just give you the answer to that very quickly. Hold on 1 second. So the number of patients that are delayed today is 126. So yeah, that's a high number of patients. And yes, we are seeing the same kind of issues in the back door of UCR and being able to discharge out of there. Just to kind of bring to life some of the actions we've taken. So this week we've had to put our community therapy team into business continuity so that our therapists are focusing on the sort of urgent therapy needs for patients within the community, but it allows us to create more capacity for our assistants to look at the care requirements of patients coming both out of our beds and out of the acute beds. And that seems to have worked relatively well this week in terms of helping to maintain flow, particularly out of some of our acute sites.
Yeah, because just in your report, Siobhan, you were saying that actually we've achieved a lot of discharges and a lot of admissions. It doesn't sort of quite correlate then with having 46 beds, percentage of beds, 43% of beds, basically out of action. So
yeah, I mean, I think that's right.
You're doing an even better job with the
That's
remaining.
what I was trying to say really earlier, which I
57.
think it's really impressive the work that our teams are doing in terms of flow and the amount of admissions and discharges we're having. Yes, when you set that in the context of the number of patients that are delayed in our beds, that's good work from the discharge services in particular.
Are you cited on what the significant factors are in preventing it? Because previously you've mentioned in reports it might be down to availability of equipment and things like that might be delaying discharge.
So there are kind of just a very few sort of issues. One is capacity for social workers to do assessments. In actual fact, the availability of packages of care in West Sussex has improved recently. But the amount of people that are needing assessment to access those is increasing every day. So some of that is around adult social care capacity, as Siobhan's just said. There are still some patients who are waiting for equipment, and we've had lots of conversations about community equipment provision previously, but those are all escalated on a daily basis. So the kind of system and all providers are focusing on the areas of greatest need at the moment, but there is still some community equipment delays as well.
Thank you, Kate.
Okay, I'll move on to the neurodevelopmental pathway. Again, something we've discussed several times at board previously, but just to note that the external provider that is supporting us to reduce the size and the length of the waiting list has started now. The feedback from patients from our family so far has been really positive. So I'll report kind of at a future meeting around the impact of that, but they will deliver assessments for 300 children on that pathway. However, we've still got a significant issue with the length of time that children are waiting on that pathway. We've got almost 70% of children waiting less than a year for their subsequent assessment, but we know that there's a small percentage of children, including some of our most complex, who are still waiting more than 2 years. There's a bit more information in this report around the sort of waiting well issue that we've discussed previously and the things that have been put in place for us to support families whilst they're waiting, and some information on the number of increased assessments.
Sorry.
Okay, and recognise the intent here. I'm just wondering, Is the limiting factor on the number of assessments from the external provider their capacity or our money?
Both.
Okay.
Well, a little bit of both. So we have agreed a review point kind of halfway through their contract, just to ensure A, quality of provision, B, productivity, efficiency, all those kinds of things. But yes, it obviously is set within the kind of context of the financial environment that we're working in. Having said that, the conversation we had at Exec Management Group was that we need to focus on how we make the provision better for these children. So I think if at that review point, if we think it's working well, then we'll have another discussion about how we can.
What does that mean, make the provision better?
How we see these children quicker.
Yeah, right.
So what is it we need to do to try and clear the waiting list and make the wait shorter for some children? But I think this is the first time we've used an external provider to do that. So we need to just make sure that what they're providing is, it's in line with what we would want to see.
And is that the group of people that we talked about earlier? Is that 80% will end up with from
Yes.
what we know, there's an indication that around 80% will end up with a positive diagnosis.
Yes.
So is there something as well around, and your report does cover it, around really ensuring that they're waiting well?
Yes.
Because the chances are that they're going to come out with a positive diagnosis.
Yeah,
It's worth almost investing in the waiting well.
Yes.
Because that might preempt things later on.
Yeah, and whilst that diagnosis percentage is high, it is exactly that. How do we support families to access the resources that are available to them whilst they're waiting for that diagnosis?
Thank you. Listen.
I've said it before, but I need to say it again, that what we're putting in is a short-term sticking plaster. And what I would love to see is a longer-term plan to reduce this down and to get on top of this problem. And I'm aware that that's easy to say and much more difficult to do, but we can't keep talking about 300 children when we know we've got 1,000 sitting on a waiting list.
Have we had a conversation with commissioners about this? Because this is a significant shift in demand that we've seen since the service was commissioned.
Yeah, and not just, there are conversations not just with our commissions, but nationally around how this pathway may need to look different and it's a pathway that crosses community providers, mental health providers, education providers. There's a need for a kind of whole scale different approach to the neurodevelopmental pathway. Which and those conversations are happening at a local and national level.
No,
not quickly enough, though.
No, I agree, not quickly. I couldn't agree more, not quickly enough.
Thank you.
Moving on to time to talk, the move to recovery metric for the talking therapy service was 53.6% in November. That's above our trust target, but has been below average for 10 months. And some of that is impacted by the work that we've done to reduce waiting times, and also a change in practice as well at the point that patients kind of reach the end of their treatment. So there's been quite a lot of work done within this service around how we can be certain that patients are being discharged at the right time, with the right support in place. And you'll see there that we had a really significant dip in August, and that was partly related to a full review of the caseload and discharge of a number of patients. But the recovery rate has now returned to the expected range, and we're still in the top third of providers nationally. Move on. Urgent community response, we've talked about quite a lot this morning already. Probably just to note that with some short-term winter funding in November, the teams began working with doctors embedded within the UCR service known as UCR Plus. That provision meets the criteria for a virtual ward, so that activity has contributed to the expansion of virtual wards over the winter. And we've actually got the highest number of patients on that caseload today that we've seen so far, so 30 patients being managed on the UCR Plus service. You'll see that our virtual ward occupancy rate didn't meet the target in November, but we've exceeded the capacity target, and actually over the last few weeks we've been regularly meeting that occupancy target of 80%, although we haven't very often met sort of stretch target for winter of 90% occupancy. But
we've talked about the reasons for that sort of historically around the closer working between acute consultants and our teams in terms of discharging patients out, but we've definitely seen a really improved position around occupancy and usage of those wards.
Can I just come back on the UCR one?
Yeah.
So we've a third of our current UCR services that we're now going to UCR plus. Does that diminish the number we can put through UCR? So we've increased the size of the teams to cope with that.
Yes, we've increased the size of the team, but it's short-term funding. So we'll there are discussions now about kind of what that looks like moving forward with discharge funding for next year.
Thank you.
I wasn't going to dwell on your exception reports, Charles. I'm happy to take questions on any of those. And then just finally to note the operational risk for the diabetes care for you service, where vacancy and turnover of podiatry staff is impacting on wait time and the need for us to clinically prioritise patients in order to be able to meet the needs. We are seeing an improvement in recruitment, but skill mix is still proving a problem. So we haven't recruited to the right kind of seniority and levels of staff that we need. So at the moment, they are having to risk stratify their caseload. It is likely that the risk will be reduced relatively shortly when some of the new starters are actually in post, but it's a kind of fairly fragile position with podiatry services across the trust, actually. And again, that reflects a national position around podiatry.
Do we have the option to expedite their entry into the organisation if that's the key change to this?
Where we can, we will. And the recruitment team are really flexibly working with us. So where we can get people in quicker, then we will.
Thank you. Any questions on the remaining of that report? Okay, well done. Thank you. Caroline, that takes us on to workforce.
Yeah, just a couple of things to note for me. The sickness rate you'll see is I didn't get my blue colour. I was waiting for my blue sticker, but I didn't get it. But the rate is increasing across the region. So although this is older data than now, regionally there's reported absence of over 7% in some organisations. So sickness is going up. I think we expect that in winter, and we heard earlier the respiratory illness that is being experienced. So that's the first point. The second point was the note on PDRs and the improvement in PDR compliance. I want to particularly note the work that Scott Hart in the business partnering team did in supporting the corporate services in improving their compliance. We sometimes focus on the performance on operational services, but some corporate services needed extra encouragement, which got provided. And him and Laura, he's the other business partner, work hard on making sure that the PDR rate is compliant. So thank you to both of those. And then the final point was around agency usage. We are reporting on the last slide of the report a usage of 1.8%, which is a very good performance in relation to temporary workforce usage. So we've got the lowest vacancy rate. I know it's not quite as low as October, but we've got a very low vacancy rate. We have, which we're still obviously continuing to try and reduce. We have a good use of bank workers. We have a good solid bank process here, and we are reducing agency, and 1.8% is a good measure. This is the national and regional area of focus and priority. So I think our performance is important, that we should note that, and I'm sure Mike will agree that that's a good performance. And it helps us not just for money, but actually for quality.
Very good. Thank you. Questions on that? One of the things we looked at before was on the churn, was people leaving with less than 2 years service. Are you beginning to see a shift in that, or is it too early to say?
I think we've been focusing on less than 1 year's service, if I recall.
Right.
And Yes, we look at that data at people committee with more scrutiny. I'm looking for the three people who sit with me and may have more recollection of our last discussion on this. But I think we are seeing improvements in that space.
Definitely.
Yeah. The 1 year data is significantly improved.
Yeah.
2 year data we haven't seen.
1 year, sorry, that's my point. Sure.
I think we should just, reflect on that last slide around vacancy rate and turnover rate being, trending low for a considerable period of time and staying low, even with the increases that we would expect on some of the, the various times of the year. That it's a difficult environment in the NHS right now, and to be recruiting and retaining and using such low numbers of agency staff. And Caroline's right, I've been personally asked about our performance in the agency space because it drives up such high cost. Is really positive, and I can see why the people committee are having a dilemma about the BAF risk when I look at the macro picture here. So I think you're right. I agree with the decision to keep the BAF risk at 16, but you do wonder, what do we need to see in terms of our stats to be assured that we can lower the risk? But I take Mandy's point earlier that it's an ongoing dialogue, but I just think to have that performance in vacancy and turnover is really commendable. So we should be proud of our people who are contributing to that.
Thank you, Siobhan. Well done, Caroline. Mike, does that take us on to the finance report?
Yes, thanks, Mr. Chair. So the Spotlight report focuses a bit on the system capital regime, and I think this actually links to some of the other conversations we've had previously today. And when I say system, I mean this is how the system is allocating money to us, because nationally, so when I say system, it's both the national system for capital, where capital is constrained, and then bringing that down to what that means for Sussex. The indications are financial planning to be concluded, but our initial allocation is a reduction in the available capital going forward into next year from this year for the whole Sussex system. That then has to get allocated among the providers in Sussex. So the assessment for us currently is, if that just got shared out on a kind of normal basis as things have before, that we would be around £1.5 million lower in terms of our capital received compared to what we think would be essential just to keep that backlog maintenance and standard replacement of kit and equipment going. So that impacts obviously the conversation we've had on estate. So what's the condition of our estate and how can we bring that up to the condition? Our ambition to be a digital leader, but it's also clinical equipment as well. So there's a constraint here that is not about cash. We have the cash to kind of invest as we want to. This is a budget that's set by us, comes down from Department of Health and Social Care, and they are set their limits from Treasury. So this is about the national kind of financial picture. It's the final result is still to be concluded, but looking forward, I think before previously a board was said, let's have these spotlight reports on the things that are worrying you at the moment. So this is concerning me, and therefore I think I want to highlight that concern to the board, that it will potentially constrain some of our ambition. And we need to just keep an eye on it and make sure we can articulate the impact, and therefore ensure we get the kind of best deal possible in terms of available capital going forward. So part of the financial plan when it comes forward, we'll dive into this in more detail. Before I go into the metrics, I was just going to pause there to see if there are any questions. No. Okay. Financial performance. This goes back to November. We were a little behind plan. December showing the same. We're still behind plan. We're broadly on trajectory. What's important now is
what do you mean by behind plan, Mike? What's that?
So our plan at this stage of the year was to be in deficit, but our plan was also to begin improving that deficit and move towards break even. So we're still in deficit. We have month on month, we did in November, and we have again in December, recorded a small surplus. So we're beginning to turn the tanker around, but not to a sufficient amount as we were expecting in the plan. So we're kind of reducing our surplus to get towards that break-even point where our income and our expenditure absolutely match completely, and we've spent no more money than the income we've earned.
Reducing our deficit.
Yeah.
You said surplus.
sorry, surplus in month reducing our deficit, and we want to get to zero. So it's a very hard ask on an organisation with approximately 320 million spend to go. You're going to spend nothing more than the income you earn. That's still our plan, but at the moment we need to improve more. We need to get a bigger surplus in each month to be absolutely sure we're going to get there. We can see a roadmap to achieve it, but we're running behind the pace at the moment.
Mike, are you confident we will get there?
I can see
What's your level of
of
what's your level of confidence?
What
I mean, there's obviously huge risks, isn't there?
there are huge risks. I on the balance of probability, I'd say it's probable. It's probable. It's more likely than not that we'll land it, but that's sort of not. That's on a 60-40 basis rather than a 90-10 basis. So yeah, I think we're more likely than not to achieve it.
Okay.
Some significant risks that we're facing down still over the next few months. Not least what happens around the system, industrial action, and then there are some risks we're managing that are more in our control and nothing to do with that wider environment.
Cool. Thank you. Any other observations around finance? Well done, Mike. Thank you very much. I think that brings us to the end of the IPR. Is that right? Good. Thank you very much, everyone. This now brings us on to a new bit of this agenda, which is about trying to bridge the gap sometimes between how committees work and how the board works. And the first time we've got the People Committee's Chair's report. And Mandy, that's from yourself.
Yeah, I was going to say, it feels like we've covered just about everything that I was going to say. So anyway, there you go. But I guess I think it's worth celebrating that. It's definitely worth celebrating. We've made really good progress on people KPIs, as it's just been sort of talked about. I think Siobhan articulated really well. So, on sickness, retention, recruitment, managing vacancies, performance reviews, everything is going in the right direction. There's one area where there's a bit more focus, and that's looking at international recruitment. Making sure that we're providing enough support to enable better success in recruitment for some of our main candidates. And so that's something that's a bit of a focus. I think Caroline also talked about the rostering system. So we're kind of underway with the tendering process, and that will make a massive difference to the way that we can efficiently kind of plan our workforce. And then I guess the big challenge, and the thing I'm very interested in particular, is the NHS long-term plan, and really trying to get our heads around what does that. I mean, there's lots of guidance within it in terms of very sort of high level, but what does that mean for us here in Sussex? What is our long-term kind of view of that? And we've had some really healthy discussions, I think, in People Committee. I think one of the challenges about when you start to look at workforce is when you're trying to predict what's going to happen to workforce longer term, it's obviously very linked to what the strategy for our service delivery is, what our estate strategy is, everything else. So we can think in the committee about some of these things, but I think it needs to be part and joined up with a much wider discussion about kind of the long-term strategy of the trust, where we see ourselves, and then clearly the workforce plan needs to sort of slot in to say, well, how are we going to support that strategy? So feels like we're making some really good progress. As I say, is there anything else I should have added? Anyone else that's important?
No, I mean, I think you're right. And we had a discussion, another healthy debate at executive management group yesterday around the importance of the trust being clear on the direction of travel with some of the things you described. So estates, digital, and service model and delivery. When we talk about podiatry earlier, it remains a risk, but podiatry at the moment are services that are split across multiple geography, across the whole organisation, supporting different services in different pockets. Actually, does that create a resilient workforce? Does that enable us to have the education training model that we want? Does that support a greater number of apprentices, for example, which we have introduced this year in podiatry with great work from the service? So these are the questions we need to answer in order to create a proper strategic workforce plan. And as you said, the national long-term workforce plan has not yet been translated at regional level. That work is still being undertaken by NHS England regionally, and I think there are some key elements of the plan that we haven't quite got yet to create the future plan, but we're keeping an eye on that. I think the conversations with People Committee are helpful, and also the conversations in the MG
Yeah, it was a suitably constructively challenging discussion yesterday, and I think because there are multiple factors, as Mandy has said, there are multiple factors that need to contribute to what that our internal medium-term workforce plan looks like, but we can't yet see a roadmap to the activity being undertaken to join up. So my how many particular clinical staff we need in a particular area will depend on our estate strategy, population demographic, the model of care we deliver, and how digital or not that service is. So we might need 10 of somebody right now, but in 4 years' time we might only need 5 because we've come out of buildings, we're working differently, and we're doing everything remotely. So that's quite a crude example, but just if you macro that up, we have to do other work to determine how many people we need, of what type, in what area. And we haven't yet, although we've got work happening around, for example, digital consultations, it's not connected to the medium-term workforce plan. So my ask yesterday was that exec management group is the place where we direct our people who are doing programs of work or is part of their day job to help us to make the connections, because at the moment the workforce plan has been discussed at workforce group and at people committee and at exec management group, and everybody knows that there are gaps in work that needs to connect in to give us the output that we need. But nobody is saying it will be done by April, or it will be done by July, or that bit will be done by October. So we've got to sort of plan out from it, which is where we landed yesterday.
Do you think the integrated community profiles landing might give us a starting point to be saying, just as kind of a baseline?
Yeah,
here's a starting point. That's where we can build out from. Because at the moment, we seem to be struggling to find a solid point to be able to build from. Could that be one? And we set don't worry about kind of the people bit, but a blueprint of this is what the organisation does look like, could look like, but use that as the catalyst point to say, here's a data point from which we can start.
It definitely can
is much better than anybody else's here, so it might.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess as I currently chair the Integrated Community Teams Delivery Board for Sussex, you're right. I've kind of overseen the development of that, and it has been a really great piece of cross-organisational work in Sussex. So we have 16 health data profiles for the 16 community teams that will be mapped out across all of Sussex. And what that does is it tells us about the prevalence rates of particular illnesses, it tells us about age, it tells us about deprivation, it tells us about childhood poverty. So absolutely, we should be in the fullness of time saying, actually, do you know what? We need 20% more health visitors in Bognor and Hastings than we do in other areas, for example. So it is the timing of it is going to be helpful for us, I think, for elements of our workforce. That won't be the panacea for all of it, but I think you're right, it can absolutely be a catalyst. And that was part of the conversation that we were having yesterday, which was what's within our gift and what levers do we have to start planning out now. In parallel, other things need to dock in, but there are some things that will help us to take some steps forward, and I think that is a good opportunity for us.
I was just going to reflect on the conversation we had at Resources Committee, actually, which I think ties into this as well, because Mark, you asked us a question about whether we are kind of responding to the commissioning landscape, or whether we're properly influencing that in terms of what do we want to deliver as an organisation, and then how do we, and I think that the two things sort of come together really, because I think once we've kind of agreed what some of the sort of response to some of what Siobhan's talked about, and therefore what does that mean for an organisation and how are we going to deliver our services, then that's what sort of partly answers the question then of what do we need in our workforce. So I think there's as Siobhan says, there's just a lot of kind of pieces of the jigsaw that we need to put together.
And I was going to say, my plea as we start to kind of forge our path through all of this is that I sense that we very often do these things kind of in isolation, and we pop out the answer and then we bring the answers all together and go, oh, well, that doesn't quite fit. And I think in the way that we design how we take it forward, it's going to be iterative. And they're probably going to be different scenarios. Well, actually, what if we do a bit of this?
Yeah.
How does that add up? That doesn't really fit. We probably need to be more virtual here because da da da. And it means you can actually then be quite dynamic in how you plan it. So I think the thinking through how this comes together is a pretty complex thing to solve. But I think the thinking it through so you've got real clarity about what the different moving parts are, and everybody's doing the thinking obviously in their own bits. But then they come together and we kind of throw it all open and say, well, okay, where does that get us and does it work? And if it doesn't, then what bits? I just think to integrate regularly rather than come up with a kind of the gold star answer and then discover it doesn't. It's just something about the kind of the way that you do it. I think would be really helpful.
Very good. Aaron.
And there might be something here just building on that in terms of looking at our life stages framework, self-assessment process, because our teams are starting to look at where are there areas for quality improvement against those sort of match criteria that we've agreed already. So we'll therefore start to get a sense of what needs to change in terms of how we deliver our services, how we work in a more integrated way for patient care pathways that are across organisations, and how we bring in digital to really innovate within our teams. So I think sort of matching what's coming out of that self-assessment process when we're thinking about the workforce development and bringing in the population health management piece might be really helpful.
That would start giving us an agenda to take to the provider collaborative kind of response to your bits rather than just responding.
Yeah.
That then allows us to take a coherent agenda into that space. Quite exciting, isn't it?
Or something. What's your resources committee?
Don't necessarily like that. Well, I'm going to follow on that because actually the point that Kate made was right. It came out on a couple of occasions around: are we taking a strategic lead and influencing the broader system, or are we responding to specific asks? So when we talked about the key contract updates, the services we provided, are we sharing our views on the service inequities, the variance, and so forth? Are we clear what we would like to be seeing to deliver? So that I thought was the real rich conversation we had, which may be some value at some point. Who knows, from resources. But the other thing I think for the board to be aware of is actually we talked some months ago about there's a lot of activity around contracts, and the sense is that the risks associated with that is mitigating. We've talked about MSK. I'll give you an update in a second, but actually there's some changes in the broader, something called the provider selection regime, which allows local authorities to award. So things like Healthy Child programs will probably just get that awarded, and it reduces the risk of going through different processes, all completely legal and above board. So that was helpful. I thought that was good. But actually the key element of the conversation was, are we clear where we can lead and influence broader discussions? In MSK, the phase 1 ITT was submitted before Christmas. There's been conversations with the ICB. We are in the chair as the contract holder, but there is a clear partnership between ourselves here and UHSX. Worth the board being aware, phase 2 comes out mid-Feb and will close before the end of March. So we may need some flexibility as to how we bring and approve if we need to the actual proposal, either at resources or at board, because I don't think the timelines are going to be completely aligned in that regard. We did talk around money. I was fascinated by Mike's probable response to Leslie's question. I got assurance that whilst there are a number of moving parts, we understand what they are. We can't control them all, but Mike will shake his magic money tree. And we will be there or thereabouts. So if you want to tell me different.
I've been accused in the past of making it sound too easy. And it isn't easy. No, it isn't. I needed to reflect that. It's not easy and it's not a given. We do manage these things well, but there are strong forces at play out there.
And recognise also, in things like the cost improvement plan, we are behind. And the way to land on that will be some non-recurrent activity, which helps in the year but doesn't help us in the longer term. So there are challenges, and it isn't easy. I think we recognise that. We talked about estates and we touched upon this already about this sort of more holistic view. And actually, Caroline, to the point you made earlier, we were very clear that the estate's perspective is one element, the service perspective, the staff perspective, the patient perspective, and all that sort of stuff. And again, it led us to that broader conversation around, how do we articulate our strategic intent in terms of where we believe we need our locations to deliver services to meet the patient need as we go forward, the development of health hubs and other things. So I think it's worthy of a board conversation at some future point that says, here's what we aspire to. Now, there are lots of constraints around money and location and premises and everything else, but I just think there's some value in bringing that together once the work has been developed more fully. And then the other
that can spin off the integrated community piece as well, just as a starting point.
Yeah, I think part of this is about, are we clear what we think and taking it into those conversations, or are we responding to conversations that are happening elsewhere? And part of this, from my perspective, is actually my sense is, we are the ones with that holistic view, and therefore we should be informing and influencing others rather than responding to them. So I think it will be a key part of that, but it's the extent to which we around this table are clear in this is what we aspire to. It may not be easy to deliver, but I think it's worth having a conversation here, Giles, as well as more broadly.
I think there is something about the positioning of SCFT in trusts across Sussex, that we have a lot of interaction with primary care, a lot of interaction with acute, a lot of interaction with mental health. So that there is, I kind of refer to it as almost a glue before now. As you say, we've kind of got strong interfaces on all fronts.
I was just wondering, Mark, about the state strategy and the delivery of it. Do you get oversight of that at Resources Committee, or is that something we need to get collectively better at?
We've seen the estate strategy and we get updates on progress, but I think it has been an estates focused piece. And I think we've had some fascinating conversation in resources as byproducts of things like, we're not going to invest in this particular dental upgrade because we're not sure the service is in the right place to deliver to the patient. Brilliant. Then actually, what are we going to do to reshape that? Or we've talked previously about, the location of premises and whether they help or hinder the delivery of care. So I think historically the estates piece is focused on condition and that, painting the fourth bridge type stuff, as opposed to really where do we want to be and what we do. The only piece we cover off is the PGH piece, I think, in that broader strategic intent.
So maybe, I know you mentioned about a future board conversation, maybe in probably a sort of workshop seminar type conversation, we need to probably, I don't know how many of board members, because we've had new members since the state strategy was developed, first of all, socialise it, because we all need to know the answer to your question, which is what is our shared ambition about state? I could tell you at a high level, it used to be that we had less of it so that it didn't cost us so much money. Yeah. But beyond that, is that still our ambition? If so, how do we factor in demographics, population health, integrated community teams? So it does feel like, I think you started to say, it does feel like it's a spotlight that the board needs to sort of shine on, a collective understanding and some direction, actually, because the board needs to set some of that strategy and ambition.
And I don't think here's the answer.
No.
I think here's what we know, and here are the questions. At this stage. Sorry, Mike.
I was just saying, I think that's welcome. I think I wasn't going to prolong the conversation because it kind of been said before, but it links really clearly with the workforce plan. Not just the estate strategy informs the workforce plan, but actually, obviously, the workforce plan. The workforce plan informs the estate strategy and the operational strategy. So let's do that, and let's work out how these things all interlink, because in part of the estate strategy delivery, we're in that point of saying what's our likely way of working over the next few years, because buildings and changes in buildings runs over a longer and slower time scale than something. So you've got to be looking to the future, not the now. But I welcome that chance to kind of have that conversation at board. And where have we got to in the estate strategy? What next?
And then the only other thing I was going to call out, Charles, we've talked about Zachary Merton already in terms of what we're doing in the now. We had a useful conversation, I think, about some of the lessons learned. I think the first thing I'd observe is we recognised it was a very protracted timescale and process to get to the point that we made this transition, and the end bit then had to happen very quickly. So I think there was something about recognising that this wasn't completely within our gift in terms of how the process ran, but we had to ensure we delivered the correct outcome, which is actually the transfer of the properties. Three things I think were highlighted, or at least that I picked up, Mike, you can correct me, in relation to some good learning. One was around, the level of insight we have from the surveys and where there may be value for greater depth in some of that activity. The second one was quite an interesting piece around the coordination between different groups, infection prevention and control, health and safety, and estates, to ensure you've got that full picture of estates. And that's not just for transfers in, that's of course now, for all of our estate activity. And the third thing, and you touched upon it earlier, was the visibility of estate risks on the risk register, and making sure that we avoid that blimey, this has happened scenario. So we're not in the process of further transactions. I don't know that we're able to do that now. I think that window may have closed, but actually just thinking about these lessons within the broader estates, I think is really quite helpful. And the other stuff we talked about, risks and so forth, in front of points.
Interesting. Was there anything around timing of when the survey was done, when you said it's protracted, and when the transfer happened, that possibly the survey was almost out of date at that point in time?
I think
no, it was very contemporary. It was almost the opposite.
Yeah.
That we've been waiting for the process to complete and get the green light to do the transfer, and then running a survey really quickly, so it was contemporary, and we knew just before that transfer happened where we were, what was happening. But actually, at the time to digest all of that, really kind of embed that thinking in what we were going to do next, meant that we had a view of the building. We had then got a more detailed view, and actually, as we've talked about here, the way the building then responded in terms of a very wet first few months of of the autumn, and that transfer again was different to how the survey had portrayed the kind of urgency of work required. So the urgency wasn't quite reflected in any of those bits and pieces, and as we know, the building failed quite quickly.
The other thing, it's a bit like when you buy a house, how much money you spend. You're having a full structural survey and spending a lot of money, or you're having a lower level survey because you feel like it should be okay. And actually, one of the conversations was the level of survey that we commit to may or may not be appropriate. We just need to challenge
We need to review that further and understand how in depth you go with surveys, or how you enhance that survey with our own expert opinion and work to.
So you've lived in it for quite a long time.
We actually, yeah, so it felt familiar.
Yes.
We've been running services there for a long time, and we were getting information from previous owners, property services. So.
Oh, really good. Thank you very much. That takes us on to the QIC report, Leslie.
Yes, thank you, Giles. It's just a few points I want to bring out. I mean, obviously at QIC, we see a lot more Chloe IPR indicators, and it's just to give assurance that all of those continue to show a good level of standard of care. But importantly, we're starting to triangulate some of that information as well. So we get a report on the ICUs, which pits staffing against some of the quality indicators, and equally some of those teams with the highest vacancy levels. Again, we have quality indicators alongside them to ensure that safe care is still being provided, and it is. We can give that assurance to the board.
Thank you.
I wanted to also raise the issue, the patient safety strategy update. We needed to have moved, the target date was January, to move to the patient safety incident response framework, and that has been achieved. Obviously with the implementation of the new in-phase system replacing Datex, which seems to have gone smoothly. So congratulations to the team for that, because that was a huge undertaking and went well. I just wanted to pick out around the safer staffing update that we received at QIC. There will be another report coming to the board in the next couple of months. The audit will be carried out again this month. It's probably completed by now. But obviously that report needs to come back to the board. But we saw an interim report which showed no changes required, apart from, and this again links back to the workforce strategy, in the previous safer staffing review, there was a recommendation of introducing some nurse associate posts, which we haven't been able to recruit to. So those are now going to revert back either to our qualified RNs or HCAs, depending on the units. But obviously that will need to link into the longer term workforce report as
we couldn't recruit.
there aren't any out there, basically.
It's more, so we have been able to recruit to trainee nursing associates, and they undertaken that generally through an apprenticeship programme. What's great for them and the national picture is that once they've completed that, they're absolutely delighted with their qualification and want to continue to top it up with an additional 1 year apprenticeship to become a registered nurse. So they're generally qualifying. They might stay with us for 6 months, but then they go on and top up to be a registered nurse. So again, from a longer term workforce planning, we're growing a registered nurse population. But these posts we put in, we'll keep some of them, I think, because we still need some of those training development posts, because that staged way of entering the nursing profession works for some people, but we can't have as many as we've got because we need to, because we're not able to bring in as many as we thought we could.
Thank you, Donna. Karen.
Yeah, no, Donna just said what I was going to say. We had a 75% vacancy rate in that particular workforce, and that's not sustainable after a few years. But we should retain those roles where we can, because they are important stepping stone between being a healthcare support worker and being a registered nurse, and while continuing to work. And it's an apprenticeship route, both a trainee nursing associate and then trainee registered degree nursing role. And these are all acronyms that I'm trying to translate into actual. So I think we should. What we can't do is block career progression, because we haven't been able to recruit to the totality of it, but we should retain some.
Yes. Thank you.
So we also introduced a new agenda item in QIC this time, because one of the things that we've been wanting to hear more is around the patient voice. And I know we get reports to the board and patient stories to the board, but we wanted to look at a different way of doing that in QIC. So we had a presentation of a formal complaint from a relative of a patient who was at the end of their life. And it was really very poignant and actually very powerful. But what we also wanted to focus on was the actions taken after that and how the learning had been spread. And we gained quite a lot of assurance from the presentation and the follow-up about how that had happened. The other part about hearing the patient voice is part of the patient safety strategy. We obviously have 2 members of QIC now who are patient safety partners, members of the public, and their roles, they've been in post now 6 months, I think it must be. So there's a review being undertaken of their role, and obviously views from themselves, but also from the impact they've made as well. So it'll be interesting to see that coming back too. The only other one I wanted to pick out from the report was that we've had the evaluation of the EPMA, which was great because, again, we'd had a presentation at board some while ago. We were looking forward to seeing the evaluation. And overall, it's achieved or partially achieved 77% of the benefits expected, which is a significant amount. There's clearly still more work to be done, and Ibn pointed that out for us. So it's an ongoing progress, and there will be another evaluation undertaken at the end of this calendar year. So really hopefully to see some more there. Yeah. So happy to answer questions on anything else.
I'm just impressed you created a new agenda item from what was already an incredibly busy committee.
I think it's very powerful though. It went very well.
Thank you, Leslie. Really, really good. We now move on to the Emergency Preparedness, Resilience and Response Annual Report. Kate, I think you're talking to this, although it's been written by Rebecca Allsop, our Emergency Planning Lead.
Yes, indeed. Thank you. And I'd have liked Rebecca to have been here really, but she isn't working today, so wasn't able to be. So as I say, this is an account of the activity that's been undertaken from October 22 to October 23. Just to note, we're not a Category 1 responder under the Civil Contingencies Act, but we do have to plan for and respond to emergencies and incidents in a manner that's sort of proportionate to the scale of the services that we provide. NHS England require all NHS organisations to have an accountable emergency officer, which for this trust is me, and I'm supported by the emergency planning lead, which is Becky, an emergency planning officer and an emergency planning support officer. So I need to provide assurance that our organisation has allocated sufficient experienced and qualified resource to meet our emergency planning requirements. The Trust Resilience Group is responsible for overseeing the EPRR programme of work. We meet quarterly and we have a role in triangulating the outputs from all the kind of key governance work streams so that we make sure that we're proactively identifying any gaps in our resilience plans or structures. And as a resilience group, we report and escalate to the executive management group quarterly, and then with this annual assurance provided to the board. The work of the trust is linked into the national structures, so we link in through the Local Health Resilience Partnership and the Sussex Health Responder Group, so we're represented at both of those. Just looking at the work that we've undertaken during that period, you can see on page 4 the list of policies that have undergone formal review and been updated through 2023. There's a discussion underway currently around how we audit the business continuity and management arrangements for the trust, and that is likely to be part of the 24-25 tier audit plan. In terms of risk, there are currently 3 risks on our risk register related to emergency planning, and throughout the period that this report relates to, there's been a risk added around what's the word I'm looking for? Added around industrial action, thank you, and that came onto the risk register and then was accepted during the year. The 3 live risks are around new and emerging infectious diseases, cyber resilience and risk, and operational pressures which are created, which risk the quality of patient care. The emergency planning team oversee the sort of mitigations and the plans that are in place for those. And then there are a number of risks that we have on our accepted risk register. So we acknowledge that there are risks to the organisation, but those are acknowledged and accepted risks, and those are also reflected in the Local Health Resilience Programme risk register as well, and you can see a list of those at the top of page 6. The industrial action risk was added on the 10th of February 23 and then downgraded in October 23. And you'll see later on in the report the process that we put in place to sort of manage the risk around industrial action, and we've talked about that previously at board. One of the key focuses last year for the team was on the rollout of the business continuity management programme, which they started in July 22 and then continued through 2023. They've done a full review of all our business continuity plans and processes, acknowledged where there were sort of gaps in those, and have worked really closely, predominantly with operational teams through most of that year to improve those. But there's an ongoing process of working with corporate teams to make sure that our corporate teams' business continuity plans are also robust. You can see there in the table the compliance rate, which is much improved on previous years in terms of up-to-date and robust plans. The Trust-wide business continuity plan was fully reviewed and ratified in August, and the team will continue sort of validating and embedding those plans as we move through 2024. As part of that, we've introduced a new governance process to ensure that business continuity is more proactively managed through the organisation, so that we sort of don't find ourselves slipping back from the position that we're currently in. In terms of training and exercising, all staff who are on our on-call rota receive an introduction to on-call training session, which is in line with their level of command. So that's operational, tactical or strategic, previously known as bronze, silver and gold. And everyone on that rota is required to attend a 3-yearly refresher. The number of trained staff that we've got in the organisation has increased for strategic and operational on-call, but decreased for tactical. And the reason for that is that the emergency planning team have really focused on training up all new staff who've come onto the tactical on-call rota, whereas a lot of our operational on-call staff have remained the same. So they will focus on that this year, but they've prioritised those that are new to the rota. Strategic on-call staff, so that's gold staff, now receive on-call training via the Principles of Health Command training, which is now delivered by the Sussex ICB. So there's consistency across providers in terms of the training that that level of command are receiving. And the team will make sure that they're just keeping an eye on competency levels of all key staff as they move through the training and exercise plan for the following year. They've also carried out a comprehensive review of hazmat training for all our staff in UTCs and MIUs, which aligns to the newly updated national operational response to incidents where there is suspected hazardous substances or CBRN materials. In terms of exercising, we had a really improved year for exercising within the trust, and we had a number of internal exercises to test our plans and build on lessons learned from previous incidents. We've also been involved in a number of external multi-agency exercises, which have started to inform our plans and policies. You can see all of the exercises that we've taken part in from page 9 onwards, and the learning of those. I'm not proposing to go into those in any detail. I've talked about industrial action, and as I say in the report there, you can see the incident response that we made to that. On page 12 of the report, there's a table that details the live incidents that we've managed throughout the year, and the ones that we've had to respond to. There are a lot associated with weather and water and power, and actually we have responded to a really significant number of incidents across the organisation for that period of time. For all of those incidents, there will have been either an internal or a multi-agency debrief, and then we take the learning from that to the resilience group, and then we'll monitor that key organisational learning has been captured and shared. Just moving on to the annual assurance process, colleagues who were here when I presented this report last year will remember that we had lost our assurance rating of fully compliant and slipped to partially compliant. I'm really pleased to be able to report that we are back to fully compliant. So NHSE is responsible for gaining assurance on our preparedness to respond to incidents and emergencies. There were more core standards in that assurance process this year, which were applicable to us for an organisation than we have ever had to report against previously, and the highest number of standards to date. We undertake a self-assessment process against those core standards, and then the ICB emergency planning team gain assurance from us in terms of where we've self-assessed. Every year there's a deep dive, and the deep dive this year was on EPRR training, but the self-assessment into the deep dive area doesn't contribute to our overall rating and is reported separately. So you'll note that of the 74 national core standards, 58 were applicable to SCFT, and we were 100% compliant with each of those core standards. The deep dive was 10 standards in total this year, and we were rated fully compliant for 7 and partially compliant for 3. So again, a really good outcome there. So just in conclusion, I hope that the board can take assurance from the report that there is a clear and effective governance and oversight and leadership of EPRR within SCFT, and note that we are back to fully compliant with all the core standards. You'll see just at the end of the report there the focus for the team in 2024, which is to maintain our full compliance against all the core standards, to continue the implementation phase of the business continuity management system, particularly focusing on corporate services, and to develop and deliver the embedding phase of that, and to implement a new training and exercise programme with a focus on developing the on-call training package to align with the NHSE minimum occupational standards requirements.
Brilliant, Vic. Well done. Yeah. It's a very, very good gather through all of that. Any comments from around the room? Karen?
I just wanted to kind of comment on what one of the incidents was around the loss of our recruitment system, and that was significant and went on for quite a long time with not always the right amount of communication with the the company that supplies us. So the work of the team in bringing people together to make a plan and then making us think about our business continuity plan was really important. So I just wanted to note the great work that they do when everybody else panics. They calmly bring you together and help you make a plan, which I thought we should note really. So thank you.
Well done. Thank you very much. And huge commendation for bringing it in fully compliant again. That's really recognised as well. So congratulations for doing that. The other kind of what bit of assurance I also take from it is for all of the live incidents, I think I was aware of them all. So that's kind of quite a nice bit of assurance, is that those things at that level, the information is getting through. The other thing I'd say is if you're doing any training exercises, I'm sure myself or any of the nets would be very happy to play in any of those. It's just the kind of thing, well, I'll go and brief the chair, I'll go and brief the, all right then, come on, and see what it's like. So
Stroppy public, anything like that?
Yeah. Mark's the first in line.
Throwing bricks at staff, I know that's my previous.
It's very tabletop, isn't it? You kind of, yeah, I think it's like a tabletop exercise. There's no ideas tactics on it, sorry.
Shame.
Yeah.
Okay, really well done, and thanks to Becky and the team as well for bringing all that through. Good. That takes us on to the fit and proper persons test framework. Zoe, are you able to talk and minute this as well at the same time?
I can talk, and luckily we're recorded on the live stream.
Fantastic. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Charles. So this is a briefing on the fit and proper persons test framework, which is a new framework launched by NHS England last year. The framework complements the regulations which were pre-existing and were something which the Trust was subject to as part of its CQC registration. So it's a complement, not a replacement to the existing regime. The framework builds on the findings of the CARC review. It provides some kind of helpful guidance in terms of the application of the fit and proper persons test. It also puts some new requirements in around the use of ESR to record and report on fit and proper person testing. It makes some changes in terms of references required, in terms of references that need to be given by organisations for departing board members. So they're all outlined in the paper. I won't run through them. In terms of the next steps, we have been applying the new our position, if you like, where we are at the moment in terms of the implementation of the new framework. We've been applying the provisions of the new framework to new joiners since the 30th of September. We are required to have fully implemented the framework by the end of March. So we are currently drafting a new FPPT policy, which will be taken to the Executive Management Group for approval and then ratification by the Audit Committee in March. We're working on the internal processes that we need to have in place to be able to apply the new fit and proper persons test to all board members in time for a report which needs to be submitted by Giles as the Trust Chair and the responsible person for FPPT to NHS England in June. I think that was all I kind of wanted to run through, and I can just any questions.
Any questions on the fit and proper persons test?
Yeah, I think thanks, Zoe, for sort of articulating what has been something that we've been subjected to for a long time. We have all signed annual self-declarations as board members to say that we are compliant with the fit and proper persons regulations. But it does feel very different. It feels much more robust. The fact that the chair of the trust has a responsibility to submit this now to NHS England is very different. And also, I know you and I were speaking about the purpose of the reference, because obviously I've had an exec team member leave during the period of time that Zoe was talking about, and the reference is a very diligent part of the process. So the reference I had to do for our departing CMO felt very different to any other time an exec director has left, because it asked some probing questions to ensure that when somebody leaves, they're not going to another organisation with a known set of issues that may be problematic. And if you think about some of the leadership challenges within the NHS at national level in different organisations, and some that have hit the press, you can see why this level of robustness has been introduced, particularly last year, by NHS England. So I just wanted to reflect that my experience of it recently with the board reference as part of FFPT, and the fact that Giles has to sign a declaration to send to NHS England, those two things feel very different. And you drew them out, but I just I was reflecting on that as you were talking.
Good. And the reference you do is irrespective of whether it's kind of like needed or not for the next role, isn't it?
I queried that with Zoe actually, because our CMO is not going to a board level role. Our ex-CMO is not going to a board level role, and I did query that very thing, but the rules are, irrespective of what role you go to, when you leave a board level position, there is an obligation. Yeah.
It's very, very robust.
I was surprised by it in the level of robustness, and because it wasn't a board role that our departing CMO was going to, but that those are the rules, and it is much more stringent.
Yes.
Is that shared then with the individual concerned?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well done, Zoe. Thank you very much for that. That takes us back on to Charitable Funds Committee Chair's report. Mandy.
That's me. There's been lots happening in the charity. We had a really good session in December with the board as trustee, and out the back of that, some quite significant changes have been made. At that meeting, the decision was agreed to move our funds from a portfolio managed by Barclays basically into a bank account, which would give us much more certainty and is much more relevant for the size of our charity. So that brings assurance really that we've just got much more oversight and control of our funds. The good news is, as we sold those investments, we actually resulted in a higher price than we expected. So actually it also put our general fund into a healthy positive balance, which was just good news all round. And we've also had good news in that there's been a recent agreement with the exec to reduce the management fee for the charity from SCFT. So all greatly received. And what I've seen attached to this is the kind of highlights. There's a report that goes out with the sort of highlights of what's been going on in the charity. Because our funds haven't been great, we've not done loads of stuff, but you can see that we've been trying to encourage this kind of case study thing, which kind of brings to life some of the grant funding that we do. So there's a little case study in there about the learning disability care bags, which were very well received, and also just bringing to life kind of some of the fundraising from the carol service and the raffle over Christmas, that kind of thing. And we're going to have a new website which will launch in April, which will just be trying to make this much more visible to everybody, and also just making it easier for people to understand how to apply for kind of grant funding from the charity. So I think that's going to be a massive step forward. Sort of in the light of all of this kind of resetting of moving some of our funds out of Barclays and everything else that's gone with it, and also in the light of finally the Laurie legacy, we've actually kicked off that now. So Laurie legacy is about joint funding of link workers in Midhurst. It's a partnership with Age UK. And that means that we do now need to really start to focus on fundraising. So we're pulling together a strategy with a much more ambitious fundraising strategy to go with it. And so there'll be more to see on that in future board meetings, I would imagine. But really good. It feels like since only in December, we've made a lot of progress in this time.
Very good. I met with Rosie, who is our charity fundraising manager, who seems to be bursting with energy and good things to do. So full testament to her for her part in this round too. But thank you to you for the energy and time you've given as well, Mandy, and chairing the committee on it. Any comments around the Charitable Funds Committee? Thank you. That takes us on to Audit Committee. Jill.
Thank you, Chair. It was a pretty standard audit committees went. I mean, I think things to highlight was that conversations have now started with internal audit to look at the audit plan for 24-25, working with the exec directors and looking at areas of risk and the BAF, etc. So that will be coming back to the March Audit Committee for approval. We're also looking at the timetable for the annual accounts, annual reports, and all the statutory stuff that we need to have in place. The external auditors, it was their full meeting since their appointment. So although they weren't able to produce a written report at this stage, they are working with Mike's team to get processes in place to do the value for money work and the preparation work for the external audit so that we can hit the timetables. And I think that's about it. It was a really standard report, and we've meeting really without such interesting things as my other committee chairs. And it was a very standard,
Very essential.
I thought it was fascinating. It's very exciting. The only thing I was just going to add was that I thought we got some interesting insights from our new intern audit partner.
yes,
Bringing in some things that are happening elsewhere, which I think helps inform and validate some of the actions we have. So I enjoyed it.
No. Thank you, Mark.
Well done. Anything else on audit? Well done, Jill. Thank you very much for that. That takes us to another new item that we've got on here, which is the report from the Council of Governors meeting. This is around how, on the back of the well-led review that we did with was it Audit 1 last year, talking about how the governors' meetings were run, and we've tried to release execs from attending the governors' meetings because the governors' function is to hold the non-execs to account, and having non-execs attending the governors' meetings and presenting there. So as a result of that, this is so that the board gets full sight of what's happening at the governors' meeting. I'll just draw out a couple of bits from this, because the governors do get themselves around the trust. They are keen to do service visits. They attend community events that are there. And of course, a number of them are potentially our patients as well. And our staff are represented on the governing body too. The community engagement from them is incredibly strong, attending different events around the county and building the membership for the Foundation Trust. One of the interesting things that they've been doing as well is Mary Hamilton gave a very good presentation around developing the quality priorities. She described a process, and they're looking forward to seeing coming back, I think, in February, and also actually consult with the governors on what the priorities should be for the 24-25 quality priorities. And then various other things that have been going on. The other one that I draw out is at one of the seminars that we had, we invited Stephen Lightfoot as the chair of the ICS to come along and do a presentation, but also then invited the lead governors and deputy lead governors from the other foundation trusts, of course, across the county to attend, and that seemed very well received by all of them as well there. There is currently a number of vacancies coming up for the governors in the trust. And the nominations for governors closed this Monday afternoon. I think there are 4 constituencies that are up for re-election or replacement within them. One of them being Arran, there was only a single nomination for there, but for the other 3, being Brighton and Hove, Crawley and Mid Sussex, there are 3 nominations in each of those, so they will progress to an election process for those. But other than that, that's what I'll cover off as the meeting in the governors. Until after that, Alan's joined us on the screen to be seen, just for me to be able to give that update. Are there any comments for the Council of Governors update coming in? Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone, for that. That's the last item on the agenda for today, and that brings us to any other business. Siobhan?
No.
Going round? Nothing. No other business. Brilliant. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for a very energetic meeting. I'm finishing a little bit early.
Thank you, Chair.